Hey guys, it's Villain Theory and welcome to my tier list. This is the first time I've ranked heroes on a tier list in over 18 months since, basically the beginnings of my channel. And since then, we've now got player side schemes, the pool aspect, 12 mutants, and 2/3 of the shield wave. So we've got a lot to talk about, a lot of things have changed, and I'm older and hopefully wiser, which might affect some placements in a good way as well. But there's 59 heroes now. No tier list is going to be perfect, I'm not saying this is, but it is definitely my attempt of something with a few conditions as well. Now, I should say I am doing 2 tier lists within this 1 tier list video, so I'm going to be talking about each hero, then ranking them for both solo and for 2-player. I think for 3 and 4-player, it would need its own tier list, we'd have to separate it into roles and different things, although for the most part, I think the 2-player dynamic is fairly close, and most of those rankings are going to do a pretty good job at overall guidance, even for the 3 and 4-player. But not enough that I'm going to put my name to exactly that. Now, before we get into my final tier list, I do want to go over a couple of those conditions I mentioned, a couple of things that are kind of guiding this tier list and why I'm making it and so on. If you want to skip to the action, timestamps and chapters are down below, but don't leave an angry comment because of how I've ranked something. If you didn't have the context, I fully recommend watching it. I think it will add a lot to the rest of the tier list if you understand, all the reasoning behind things. So let's just get into it. Firstly, this tier list is aimed at helping people choose characters. Also, I think it's interesting to create discussion and people to join in and share their opinions and so on. But I think tier lists are really useful to help people choose what to play. I know a lot of the time when I'm looking at other games, I will kind of look up a tier list just for some guidance, just as a starting point to help me make my decisions in something I'm unfamiliar with. So I'm aiming for quite a broad audience, things that are going to help in a general sense. And that is why I'm also saying no to rush strategies. I think they're so specific they kind of deserve their own list, because if I rank somebody quite high because they're good at rush, and then somebody plays at kind of conventional speed, it's not going to add up. The tier list is going to kind of have misled them in that regard. I'm also not going to include infinite or near infinite combos. There's only 1 or 2 that I think are like super competitive and actually really, really good. But even so, I don't think it's generally the way the game is played. Now, based on your feedback, what you guys said is that you're more interested in heroes being talked about with interesting decks with variety or things that suit them, as opposed to slapping all the best cards that most heroes can make use of onto the same heroes, over and over again. So I am excluding what I think are some of the strongest decks that are generically applicable across the board in terms of mainly mass card draw decks and ally recursion decks. I did a whole video on the strongest decks, which goes a bit more into most of these. But long story short, I think these kind of decks are the decks that kind of turn the game from superhero versus supervillain into I'm just going to use these numbers to make good numbers and overwhelm the game with numbers until I win. It kind of turns the game into a maths puzzle, and ultimately, a card game based on numbers is kind of a maths puzzle, but I think this really kind of just takes it to a separate level. And it's a level that I don't think is particularly useful, talking in a super general broad sense, because I do not think the majority of decks people play fall into these two, and I think they are somewhat warping kind of categories of decks. Just my opinion, but I did get a lot of feedback toward that effect as well, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, one of the more complicated points that I want to go into here, which I think is quite interesting, is this video kind of favors the consistent hero and their deck. However, this video also does reward peaks. If someone does do occasionally like extraordinarily well, more than you would expect, that is still valuable. And how can it reward consistency, but also decks that aren't as consistent but sometimes do extremely well? So I want to talk about this a little bit more. If you do want to skip to the hero stuff, you can just leap there now. But what I mean by this is I'm going to give you guys a chart of full nerdy villain theory style. Let's say hero 1 is red. There have been 5 games played. On the left sort of vertical axis, we've got what I'm calling power achieved, but kind of just how well that character did during that game. And across all 5 games, you can see they did sort of fairly well, kind of a very even spread. There's no massive spikes or, really low dips. This is what I'd call a very consistent hero that consistently does well. Let's compare it to hero 2, which has a couple of games where they do incredibly well. And someone might say, wow, look at my hero do this. The other hero couldn't do this ever. My hero is better. But then the green hero also has some lower kind of lows where the person playing the red hero might be like, oh, my hero would never do that badly. And you've kind of got, do you value consistency or do you value how high a character can get? And I think difficulty that you play at really shapes a lot of your perception of this. If I were to put on a rough kind of estimate, and this is all kind of abstract anyway, but of how well you need to do to be standard mode in a very general sense, I might put it something like here. So green hero that peaks high but isn't consistent, lost one of these, but otherwise it managed to exceed the level needed and it would win on standard mode, 4 out of 5 times. The red hero did win 5 out of 5 times, but it's not a huge difference in it, and you might say it's not a big deal. But if we escalate this to, let's say, expert mode, suddenly the red hero has won 4 times, but the more inconsistent hero has lost 3 times, so they've only won twice. They've got half the wins as the red hero, so the red hero starts to look considerably better, and you might think, oh, the tier list is definitely going to be favoring consistency. And it is, but if we take this even higher to, let's say, heroic mode, suddenly the red hero has got 0 wins here, whereas the green hero, having those huge peaks, has managed to get over that huge kind of line needed to win on heroic mode. They've done really well, and they've actually got a couple of wins on that. So in some sense, the inconsistent but high peak kind of, risk-reward hero is actually going to be rewarded and do better in some circumstances, but in others, the red hero, the more consistent hero, which doesn't peak as high, would be seen as better. It really depends on the context and how you play. We could also, kind of convert this to different villain difficulty. Let's say Ronan needs you to really try and aim high. You can't just play it super safe. You need a little bit of something to get you over that finish line. And then on the other hand, let's say you've got an experienced player playing a good deck for that hero. You're probably going to beat someone like Rhino or Absorbing Man, almost 10 out of 10 times every time. For the purposes of this list, I am probably aiming roughly for like an expert level, just because I think, I don't know, 90% of heroes on standard are going to be winning 90% or more of the time. I don't think it's as interesting of a discussion, but one of the things to note there is that slow setup heroes get punished more on expert, but there's usually more going on at the beginning of a scenario, whereas on standard, they are usually free to build up for a couple of turns without too much pressure, and things go a lot better there. So do keep that in mind. If I'm ranking a character that you think is really strong, but definitely wants a few upgrades in play, I rank them a bit lower than you expect. It's probably because of expert mode, something along those lines. I typically do like playing the harder villains, not the hardest, but harder villains with harder mod sets. I think it's quite a fun place for me, so do keep that in mind. Beyond that, I just want to quickly say that the hardest villains will matter most at the top. If a couple of heroes are fighting it out, are they going to be in the bottom tier or second to bottom? I'm not going to punish them because they don't line up well with something weird Venom Goblin does, because that's probably not really relevant to what most people are playing, and probably not what you're picking that character for unless you really want a challenge, in which case I don't really think it matters. But I do think the hardest villains serve a purpose. A lot of them are fun, and I think it works as a good tiebreaker for those heroes who are kind of, otherwise the strongest, who kind of need a really high benchmark to differentiate who is better than the other. I also just want to clarify, this is taking all deck building cards into account from the core set to May 2025, which is Silk and Shuri's release, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. just before that. And the final quick note here is about the tier list I am using. Rather than go for the traditional S, A, B, and C tier and so on, I have gone for my own different levels of powerfulness. This is a superhero game. I do believe all these characters are powerful, but some have to be kind of in the right place, the right situation, very specific decks, and to get the best out of them. But it doesn't mean they aren't powerful. It's just a lot more niche, maybe less consistent power, but they can still do really well and shine in certain places. And I don't want anybody to think, these characters that I'm rating in like the lower 2 tiers aren't worth playing. They absolutely are. And on the flip side, I don't want anyone to think the characters I'm putting in the top 2 tiers are too good to play or anything like that. On the contrary, if it's fun, you should play it. And characters across this whole tier list are going to be fun in different ways to different people. But nonetheless, I would consider this video a failure if this list put you off playing certain heroes. It might just be a case that I would gently suggest, if you're going against an easier villain, maybe try some of the heroes on the lower of this list. If you're going against a harder villain, maybe that's a really, really good time to bust out some of the stronger ones. But play whoever against whatever. It's a superhero game. Tell your stories, tell your own little Marvel kind of fights, and hopefully this tier list will be fun. So anybody who watches any of my videos knows that I like to rank my heroes across different categories with different amounts of stars to rate how they've done. I think a lot of them are self-explanatory, such as damage or thwarting. Thwarting being a catch-all term for all threat removal for the record. Survivability is a mixture of like defense, hit points, how likely you are to be able to survive the villain's damage, and so on and so forth. Economy is paying for cards, whether that's resource generators or card draw. Card value is a little bit like, if I pay 1 resource, how much am I getting out of it? If I pay 1 resource and get 1 damage out of it, it's going to score low. 1 resource, get 3 damage out of it, it's going to be near the top. It also includes identity cards for these heroes and how much value they are typically worth, how strong they are compared to other identity cards, because not all of them are built equally, and it is the one card that is guaranteed to be in play from the beginning of the game until the end. It is probably the most influential card of all these heroes, so it does make a big difference. Reliability is kind of a case of, if I play 10 games, am I going to have, 10 good games, 5 bad games? How even is a game going to go, and how is my game plan kind of going to come together? And the early game, very simply, is how well does my character do in the first, 2 to 3 turns, really. You do have your full hit points to start a game. The main scheme probably has most of its sort of threat threshold left unused as well. So you do kind of have a bit of health to play with, but you have the least ability to do things at that point. And I think characters that can do really well early on and get control of the game is a significant advantage, which is why I'm rating that specifically. Which isn't to say the middle of the game or the late game isn't important, but they don't matter if you can't get to that point successfully without being defeated. Typically, this system is 1 to 5 stars, but I do give a 6 star if something is particularly incredible, and these are superheroes, so there is a fair amount of incredible stuff that just really pushes the limits you would expect that characters in this game can achieve. And now that that's done, we can finally talk about the heroes properly. And we're going to start with Spider-Man Peter Parker, giving him pretty good damage with those swinging web kicks. They're not that good for like precise minion damage, but it is 24 damage per deck pass, and he does have quite a bit of card draw to find them. It makes a difference. Unfortunately, his thwarting is among like the worst 2 or 3 heroes in the game for thwarting, which is kind of crazy, but it can be fixed with deck building. In multiplayer, it can be covered by the other player. So aside from that, he is doing everything to a very high degree. He's an absolute tank with backflip, aren't made healing, webbed up, 3 defense stat. He's flipping around all over the place, and most villains should have a really difficult time to defeat him from damage. It just really shouldn't be happening. His economy is really good as well. Alter Ego, he generates a resource. He's also got access to genius cards like Moon Girl for card draw, Ingenuity for resource generation. He's got his web shooters. On his hero side, he's got Spider Sense to draw a card. He has Black Cat, one of the greatest signature allies in the game still. I feel like, it's a little bit hit and miss, but she can just draw you 2 cards sometimes, which is absurd. And if she doesn't, she's still good. So Peter Parker is just a very, very rich character. And because he has that card draw, it kind of gives him more options than a hero whose economy kind of strength only comes from resource generation. So having those options to have flexible turns, more options to choose from, is a really big strength here. It can also help him put his big swinging web kick cards together for one big damage burst combo, which is a very powerful strategy for winning games, particularly for the hardest villains, which I think is notable here. I think Spider-Man Peter Parker is a character that I'm going to have to kind of weigh up against the strongest characters in the game, because I really think he is that good. Card value is 5. I don't love webbed up Spider Tracer. It's very hit and miss, particularly at these lower player counts, 1 and 2 player that we're talking about. But all of his other cards are exceptionally good. He can cancel treacheries. He's again got Aunt May. I cannot begin to say how good Aunt May is. He has a lot of really, really good stuff. Good traits all round. Avengers can get Web Warrior, so on and so forth. Reliability, I put at 3 stars, which is good, but not amazing. It's just because, his swinging web kick isn't ideal for minions. His webbed up card isn't ideal if you have to end up using that for defense. Spider Tracer can miss that kind of thing. Enhanced Spider Sense, that blocks treacheries, only works if you draw a treachery while it's in hand. Otherwise, it's like, okay, do I just keep hold of this card and hope I get one next turn? Or do I just spend it on something else that I didn't get its awesome value? So he has situational cards. It's not always going to play out quite as well, but it's still going to generally play out well. And I think his early game is good. I think he can do quite a lot without needing a significant amount of upgrades out. He has the extra resource generation, particularly because, in the second turn, the villain will attack you, Spider Sense will trigger, and you'll have 6 resources next turn to keep the momentum going. I think that's very good. Now, in my original tier list, I put this guy around the middle, and the day after, I played him and Nova in a 2-player game, and I was like, wow, I rated both of these characters way too low. And since then, Web Warrior Fanatic has got more and more popular, another YouTuber who really likes Web Warriors, really likes Spider-Man, plays a lot of Spider-Man, and has made a really strong case for Spider-Man Peter Parker being an S-tier character, which, if you were to ask me, 2 years ago, I would have said was just completely absurd. So looking to rank him at 2-player, I think his Enhanced Spider Sense is a little bit more consistent. I think his Spider Tracer a little bit more consistent than solo play, but generally I think I'm going to be ranking him about the same in both player counts. And do I think he's S tier? Do I think, for my tier list, I'd be putting him at ludicrously powerful? I think if I wasn't restricting, recursion with allies, maybe if we could play Moon Girl over and over and over again, maybe he genuinely could move up. But for me, I'm going to put him in immensely powerful. But I was close to putting him up there. I genuinely think he's really good. And it's a combination of his traits. His survivability means the hardest villains are not going to be able to take him out too easily. One of the biggest threats from the toughest villains in the game is they will just wipe you out on the first turn or 2. Spider-Man doesn't have to worry about that much. He also has a ton of money to respond to stuff, and oh no, he gets an extra attack against him, he gets an extra card to deal with it. The more he's under pressure, kind of the more card draw he gets to kind of deal with it. It's kind of a small comeback mechanic that's specific to getting attacked, but it does help him out against some difficult places, and in non-difficult places, doesn't need it as much. And because he has a lot of card draw, he can get his damage together, his swinging web kicks, for some really easy villain takedowns sometimes. And against the hardest villains, that particularly matters. You know, the longer you hang around, the more they're going to keep doing their really, really bad things to you. And it also occurs to me that, you know, years ago, designers put out a challenge to beat Claw on Heroic 3. I'm not taking Heroic too much into account in this video, but Heroic 3 means basically like playing on Expert mode, but you're getting 4 encounter cards instead of 1. And if that sounds absurd, that's because it is. But it is with a Spider-Man deck that Kennedy Hawk of Marvel Champions Monthly was the first one able to beat this challenge, and I don't think that's a coincidence. The strengths of having really high survivability, lots of money, and being able to put burst damage together is very similar to Bishop, a newer hero, but I think a lot of people consider Bishop to be very strong and Spider-Man Peter Parker not to be as strong, but Spider-Man Peter Parker, although it's through different methods, kind of has a similar strength in some ways, which hopefully gives context to his very high placement, because I think he's going to end up toward the top of this tier, really knocking on the door of the top. I do think he is that good. So for our solo tier list, I am just going to put him in exactly the same place. Moving on, I'm not going to spend quite as long on one character. I think we've got a good understanding of what all the stars mean now. I'm just going to be talking about kind of their highlights and, you know, low points as well, and anything that the stars don't represent, as long as I remember to talk about it, because this is not scripted. So up next we have Captain Marvel, the kind of second tutorial character from the core box, and she has a lot of damage. She has 3 attack cards, but she also has 2 cards which let you build up damage on the board, energy channel, and that's really good for burst damage as well. She's also really tanky, and she also has really good economy. These are, you know, particularly having a lot of money is something that a lot of the core set heroes have in common, and Captain Marvel does this all really well. Her big weakness is that a lot of her cards, they're really quite bad by modern standards and weren't great to begin with compared to a lot of other characters. So if you get a handful of Captain Marvel events, generally you're pretty disappointed, and I think that is kind of a weakness, but with so much card draw, she will generally have other options to play with, and a couple of her cards, notably her Alpha Flight Station and her triple resources, just flood you with money to do anything you want, and you'll be so rich that even though you're kind of paying more than you'd expect for the effects of a lot of her events, it can still be fine just because you have so much excess money. Captain Marvel is just very strong, I think, at all player counts. In multiplayer, you can use her Alter Ego card draw to help anybody at the table, which is good. And in solo play, she's just good because you give yourself cards and she's got lots of money and resources to, you know, pay for them. So I'm going to put her in the same tier. So far, the 2 core set kind of tutorial characters as I see them, although perfectly fine for long-term play, perfectly enjoyable, ending up really, really strong here. Now, this isn't a trend that's really going to continue. I don't want you guys to think I'm just putting everyone in like the top tier. I think because it's a superhero game, I'll trend toward putting more characters in the top half of the tier list than the bottom half, but it should hopefully be a decent curve. So for solo play, Captain Marvel is also going to go here. Next up is Black Panther T'Challa, and with a lot of damage and a lot of money, he's also pretty good. If you set him up, he can do quite a lot. He does take just a tiny bit more to get going, ideally, I think, but you can still go, you know, surprisingly fast with Black Panther. Having a lot of money just kind of lets you do a lot of stuff quite quickly if you need to. I don't think he's quite got the burst damage of Spidey or Captain Marvel, but he still has quite good damage, and he has almost as much money of them. You could argue as much. He is rich, and that's all very, very helpful. I think a lot of people want to try and play every single Black Panther upgrade, but you don't really have to go that far, and that is because his event, Wakanda Forever, that triggers his upgrades, is pretty efficient as long as you've got 1 upgrade out. Once you've got 2 out, it feels really good. And yeah, if you can get more out, it is good, but you don't need to. So for Black Panther, I think I'm going to put him at very powerful, probably more toward the lower end of this tier, although I do think he's really good. The problem we have in this game is that it's a superhero game and there's a lot of very good characters, but I think this is a very respectable placement. He is very good. In solo, you might need something like Justice. In 2-player, you can kind of do whatever you want. Maybe lean into something more aggressive is what I enjoy doing. So for 2-player, I'll put him here as well. Next up, we have Iron Man. Iron Man is a weird hero. He has a hand size of 1 printed on his hero side, but you play lots of tech and you get that hand size boosted up a lot. And Iron Man has a lot of new tech since he was released. He even has new tech since my last tier list. We now have Energy Shield, which is a 0-cost tech card, which can just, really help him ramp up conveniently. He's now often, not always, but often going to have an extra hand size a turn earlier, which is a significant difference. On top of player side schemes, which have helped him as well. Superpowered training finds an upgrade, and I think modern Iron Man is often ready to flip down on the second turn. It doesn't always line up. There's a bit of risk to that. His reliability isn't always there, but generally you just have 1, maybe 2 turns where you don't contribute a lot, and then Iron Man is amazing. Iron Man, I think, is one of the characters that will vary most on this list between 1 player to 2 player. So at 2 player, I'm going to drag him toward the upper end, I think, of very powerful, whereas in solo mode, I think it's just really difficult for him. I might kind of move him down as we do the video. I don't know if he's going to stay here for solo play, but he definitely drops down at least a couple of tiers. It really depends on the scenario, but the scenarios that are bad for him, that have like tighter threat thresholds and punish you for being ultra ego and so on, which I think is, almost a quarter of the scenarios in the game, give or take a bit, it's fairly significant, and that does hold him back, I think, compared to a lot of other characters that just wouldn't lose or be backed into a corner in the situations where he might because of that in solo play. She-Hulk is a monster for damage. Aside from that, don't ask too much. Her forwarding is passable if you can get a Hellcat out. She's pretty tanky. She's got 15 health and high recovery. She flips down, she gets to do 2 damage. She can then attack for free. Minions on turn 1 don't generally have a chance of surviving. Side schemes definitely do, and that is a big weakness of hers. She also has a few cards which are particularly not good, whereas we just saw for Iron Man, I didn't mention it too much, but most of his cards are actually just really good. She-Hulk, on the other hand, has 4 or 5 cards which aren't great, and if you're hand size of 4 in hero form, you draw like 2 or 3 of those, it feels really, really bad. So a couple of things holding her back, but she has had a lot of love with things like Limitless Stamina, and we've just received Get Ready for a Fight, which is a new preparation to help her change form, because you want to change forms of her quite a lot to get the most out of her. Unfortunately, I think there's just so many characters that are just really strong, even though she's got some really good changes actually in the rules. She can keep her superhuman strength a lot more easily than before. It's a whole thing I'm not going to go into in this video, but she just has to set those up then, and sometimes the condition isn't always going to be met to keep them. And just with everything in consideration with how many other strong characters there are, unfortunately, I just think she has to end up in the second lowest tier. But I really want to move her up. And if things line up well for her, it can, she can feel really, really strong. 2 player is unfortunately going to be kind of the same in my opinion. But something I should point out here is that, in multiplayer, 2 player, compared to solo play, the bottom of the tier list, everyone kind of gets squished up. I still think they're mostly in a similar order, but the low feels closer because the weaknesses get covered. Even if still being able to do different things, being a bit more versatile, is still a strength. Hopefully that makes sense. Next up, we have fan favorite hero, Captain America. And since I last did a tier list, I had to move his damage and falling down, not because I kind of, got him wrong or anything, but just because I think with new characters being very, very strong, the kind of reference point for higher damage is now higher than it used to be. There's some very, very strong characters. But nonetheless, Captain America is kind of the ultimate jack of all trades, the ultimate all-rounder, ultra flexible, whatever needs doing, he can do this all day. He's just very, very solid from turn 1, super ultra reliable, and I think that is probably his biggest strength, along with his survivability. He's got 3 stuns, 2 of the best defensive events in the game, he's got a healing ultra ego, and just with his shield, free defense, you can stun the villain, you can defend an attack, then you can shield block another attack, and it won't always line up like that, but the potential is there. Kind of like Spider-Man, he doesn't lose to damage very easily, which gives him pretty good matchups against the hardest villains in the game, and definitely helps elevate him from otherwise where he'd be. Very versatile, but I think in the modern game, with the huge pool of cards we have available, that just being versatile and able to do different things isn't as strong as it used to be, because we now have stronger cards that allow us to be more flexible and do more, but he's just so reliable, and even if the villain is steady or stalwart, something that a few of these heroes that have a lot of stuns and things is going to be, quite a consideration going forward, because there are quite a lot of villains for steady and stalwart, particularly on expert mode, but his attack card is still playable, even if the stun doesn't hit, and he's still got plenty of defense, even, where other characters might really appreciate the stun, so it doesn't hold him back a lot. I think, compared to other characters, maybe like Venom, his defense event, although it can block multiple attacks, does take an extra 2 resources. Captain America can shield block very cheap and have a lot of resources to deal with whatever has happened, and that I think is quite a kind of flexibility strength as well. Also, his shield toss being able to hit multiple targets is almost like a catch-up mechanic. If you find yourself flooded with enemies and you have shield toss in hand, you can actually really conveniently, efficiently kind of take out a lot of those minions, which while shield toss isn't great when everything is going fine, if things are going wrong, it's really, really welcome, just adding to his reliability, getting the game back under control. So Captain America for me, I would have, once upon a time put him like second most powerful in the game, but that's many years ago when we only had a couple of expansions, and I think just card draw, which is a strength of both Spider-Man and Captain Marvel with new cards, he is a little bit below them, and I think there's just so many strong characters. I'm going to put him in the 3rd tier down, but he is just extremely good. He's not weaker than I or anyone else has ever said he was. There's just so many strong characters in the game, and I'm going to put him in the same place for solo play as well. Very, very strong solo hero. Next up is Miss Marvel. If you build her into aggression and really focus on it, you can really amplify her damage. That's why the asterisks are here. Same for Thwarting in Justice, that can go even crazier, particularly at 3 and 4 player. But to start with, her attack and Thwarting events are just extremely overpriced. They kind of really need you to have your upgrades in play to gain their value, which is not something most other characters have in the game. She only has 1 for 1 attack, so you have to hope you draw the right cards. She can bounce it back and use it twice, which gives her a lot of flexibility. Her Morphogenics ability to, return an attack or defense event to your hand is good. I do really like Wiggle Room. I could arguably have moved survivability up 1 star, but in the grand scheme of things, not 100%. When you don't have it, you're just 10 hit points in a dream, hoping the villain doesn't smite you. But she does have a good recovery stat. And though she takes time to build up, I don't think her early game, I think that's probably her biggest weakness is before you have all her upgrades and, her resource generating kind of supports for Alter Ego, she's very vulnerable. I don't want to place Miss Marvel. I think this is going to upset a lot of people. I really enjoy Miss Marvel, but there's just so many strong characters that don't need all this setup and things to line up and draw the right event all the time for everything, once in your stat. I think I have to put her down in the second lowest category. I really like her. It's just, someone has to go down there, guys. And I still think she's good. I'm not saying she's not good. If you tried to tell me she's good and she can do a lot, I would believe you. I just think if you build a good deck and play it well, that goes for almost every character in the game. So someone has to go down toward the lower end, and we're starting to get a couple down there now. Up next is Thor, and Thor has had a lot of help, a lot of new minion summoning cards just recently as well. Thor has had so much help. Unfortunately, you start with a 5 hand size in Alter Ego, and if you want to play your hammer, you're going to basically have to spend one of those to pay for the hammer for Mimir, and then he's got 4 cards left, and you're basically playing the game, starting in Alter Ego with 4 cards. His early game is horrendous because of it. If you've got minion summoning in your opening hand, maybe you can make something else happen. But then you're kind of setting up more things for you to defeat at a time where you've got less stuff on the board. It's not super ideal. And although I think he can do really well, the new minion summoning stuff combined with, the limited stamina, everything like that, it's helped Thor a lot. But I think in the comparison to other characters, he still just has quite a lot of weaknesses that just really, in terms of ranking, can't move him up too high. But Thor in 2025 is light years. He's basically 8 realms away from where he was. But basically every character's got stronger as well, which I think is kind of the reason you're not seeing me move him up a ton. But Thor has had a lot of help, and he is a lot of fun, particularly in multiplayer, particularly in scenarios with a lot of minions. And I think that is where Thor can really thrive. So unfortunately, we're hitting a few lower heroes now. Thor, I think I'm going to have to put here as well. Interestingly, against some of the harder scenarios, which do give you extra encounter cards and things, and Surge, there are quite a few minions there. He can get a surprising amount of card draw, but there's just a lot of scenarios and situations where things do not go well for Thor, who has really, in my opinion, very bad starts a lot of the time, which can hold him back. So again, solo, we're going to sneak him here, and we're going to move on. Next up, we've got Black Widow, and she's had a lot of help recently. She's got Gemma and Fitz in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. box. She's got Practice Plan as well there. All of this stuff helps her immensely. However, she's still quite a passive reactive hero that kind of prevents the villain doing some of the stuff they want, but she doesn't progress the game significantly. I do think she's a hero that gets better as the difficulty goes up. She has some ways to cancel and kind of mess with the villain, which gets more useful the harder the things the villain is doing are. But maybe it's a bit controversial. I know a lot of people are very high on Black Widow right now. They think she's doing extremely well, and I do think she's doing a lot better. But there's a lot of characters with a lot of very, very good decks out there in modern Marvel Champions. So there's only so high I can move her up, being realistic about all the competition, using their strong decks and doing really well as well. But she is very fun, very unique, and is definitely strong enough. So while she can be a little bit slow in some places that can hold her back, she's usually powerful. These category names aren't just for show. Usually, yeah, I would say she is powerful. You tell me she's powerful, I'd say, yeah, usually I agree with you. And in 2-player, I'm going to rank her about the same place as well. So guys, after Spider-Man, I said we were going to quicken up talking about characters, but Doctor Strange is a character I need to talk about a lot, because most people consider him the strongest character in the game. It kind of, he released and he was overwhelmingly good, and it's just kind of always been everyone's opinion that Doctor Strange is Dr. S tier, is the most powerful hero. No questions asked. And for a long time, I kind of agreed with that. And I stopped playing him really because, just why would I play Doctor Strange when I kind of felt like I almost wasn't challenged by the game? But things can change, and we'll see where I end up placing Doctor Strange. But Doctor Strange is still incredibly good, handing out toughs, putting out stuns. he is almost invincible in some ways, it feels like, but you do have to have the right invocation on top of your deck, and with the Cosmo nerf, he got officially errated. You can't use him to work through the invocation deck. He's basically down to Wong or going Alter Ego if he doesn't like something or just has to play something that isn't great for him in that moment. And I do think that can hurt him in the early game. If he can't find his damage invocation and there's a minion in front of him, and then he gets another one and it's on the bottom, there's just some weird ways a few of his things can work out. And I'm going to say it's a little bit kind of controversially. I think some of his invocations are slightly overrated. Still extremely, extremely good, but maybe not absurdly, this is the craziest thing ever good, in light of new heroes and what they're capable of as well. The bar has moved. What was 5 stars maybe a couple of years ago might not be 5 stars today, if that makes sense, in comparison to the new average we have. On standard mode, and even on expert, on like the 50% of easiest villains, he's going to be absolute powerhouse. Don't even have to think about it or deck build much. The invocation deck is going to carry you over the finish line. Suddenly you go into expert mode with the top 40% of villains, maybe even mix in some harder mod sets, and I don't think he stacks up as well as you might expect, notably compared to modern mutant heroes. So this is a controversial thing that's going to get me all the dislikes, all the hate comments. People will say, this is a worthless tier list. But genuinely, I think Doctor Strange being the top character, outdated, not true. And I think with modern challenges, with Steady and Stalwart everywhere, and also what the mutant characters can do, the strongest mutant characters don't even need a lot of mutant support to basically outdo Doctor Strange. Their own game plans are so strong that I think they kind of match it or exceed him. Now, a lot of the time, Doctor Strange's peak will exceed theirs, I'd say, but he has reliability issues, he has some early game issues, not in a general sense compared to like most of the game, but when we're trying to really get to the very best of the best of the best. If you were to bet me, $100, £100, whatever it was, to be Expert Ronin first try, Doctor Strange is not my first choice. He's not my second choice anymore. He's not my third choice. He's not even my fourth choice. And very controversially, I am gonna sneak Doctor Strange down into the second tier. I just think there are things that can go wrong or not line up where other characters it would be fine. And going back to our graphs at the beginning of the video, if you watch the explanation bit, I think Doctor Strange can peak really high, but particularly in the early turns, first 2-3 turns, he hits some lower lows that the top characters just do not hit. The top characters can still hit very high highs, but without needing the invocation deck to line up, without having a bunch of, let's face it, about half of his signature cards are a little below average in my opinion, the stuff you end up with in hand. People say, Doctor Strange, all blank cards, you can totally win against anything, no effort. Absolutely not true. 1,000,000% not true. And, people are going to think Web Warrior's got to me, he's paid me off or something, but I would genuinely have a very well-built Spider-Man Peter Parker deck than a Doctor Strange deck if I just had one try to take on some of these very hardest villains. I just know it's going to work out more reliably, and it's still going to be good enough to get me over the finish line. So it's on those grounds where, Doctor Strange, I think, definitely feels more powerful, but my money is on actually in terms of winning more, losing less, particularly on the hardest stuff. I actually genuinely think Spider-Man Peter Parker is there now, particularly with all the modern cards for him. This is not something that I think changes in solo play compared to 2-player. If anything, I think Doctor Strange is much better in 2-player, but it's close enough that I'm probably just going to keep him at the same in both categories. Moving quickly on from that, we unfortunately come to Hulk, who has some really crazy strengths, and if this was a rush tier list, I would actually move him up significantly. Unfortunately, it's not a rush tier list. He's kind of a one-trick pony whose one trick relies on you getting all physical resources. Hopefully your hand doesn't have too many unplayable cards because everything is super expensive, yet you've only got a hand size of 4. And poor Hulk has a negative hero ability, which is basically the only one in the game. They feared he was too strong. They gave him 18 hit points, 2 copies of Hulk Smash. But then, it feels like almost half of his hero kit is just terrible. And the numbers aren't good. They don't add up. It's really inconvenient. And Hulk in the comics is called the Incredible Hulk. Hulk in Marvel Champions, unfortunately, is not quite there. Now, with a well-built deck, you can get around a lot of his awkward hand problems. He can feel really fun, but you'll probably have more fun with him on standard mode in rush or rush adjacent, high tempo, fast tempo strategies. And yeah, it's kind of limited, and he can beat some of the crazy stuff in the game, but I don't think it's consistent by any means. and just the general play, general things that can go wrong, he's going to end up a bit lower than I think the Hulk as a character deserves. He should be right near the tippity top. And it ain't going to be there, guys. You know, this is not the revolutionary tier list that says, Hulk's actually amazing. You guys don't understand. This is the tier list which says, we like Hulk, but Hulk didn't get the love he deserved in Marvel Champions. Very, very simply, I'm going to put Hulk here in solo, and I'm going to put Hulk here in 2-player as well. Although, notably, again, better in 2-player, but a lot of characters, almost everyone is better in 2-player. There's just more synergies and things, and Hulk is Hulk. Up next, we have Hawkeye, who has surprisingly good damage, and, you know, he does have a couple of stuns, but steady and stalwart is a thing. You know, his thwarting is really lackluster. His survivability is very dicey. Once he gets his signature ally out, it can be better, but it's only going to be efficient every other turn kind of thing, and it's just, his economy is really messy. He can draw extra arrows and pay for extra arrows, but unless he wants to exhaust his hero to ready up his bow, he's only playing 1 arrow a turn, and the arrows aren't good enough to justify him losing out on his free attack, because the bow gives a +1 attack when it's in play, and it will always be in play. I actually quite enjoy playing Hawkeye, but he has multiple weaknesses, you know, whereas most characters have like one big weakness and maybe a couple of minor ones adjacent to that. His footing's not good, his survivability is kind of low, his hands can be a little bit fiddly because, you know, you're limited by arrows, or you just don't find an arrow, and, you know, all your arrow stuff is not firing. So if you couldn't guess, unfortunately Hawkeye is going to be pretty low in 2-player, and it's going to be the same kind of thing in 1-player, in solo. He's just a guy with a bow in a world of superheroes and supervillains. So in that regard, kind of accurate. Up next is Spider-Woman, and Spider-Woman is such a fascinating character to talk about in terms of power, because she can take cards from 2 aspects. The assumption we always had for years was she was going to grow exponentially in power, because she could always have all the best stuff that was coming out for all, you know, multiple aspects at once, combine it, do some crazy things. And to some degree that has held true. She does have some kind of unique combos and different things like that. But as there have been more and more aspect cards, the individual aspects have become strong, and we are now at the stage where it's very, very hard to build decks for characters that stick to the 40-card minimum limit, which is generally considered the best limit, because there are just so many good cards, and a lot of them have started to rival hero cards in terms of strength as well for some characters. Which is to say that, although she can take the best from 2 aspects, the best from 1 aspect right now is kind of more than a normal hero can take anyway at the moment. So I don't think her double aspect thing is as big of an advantage as it used to be. I think the kind of general card pool has kind of made the individual aspects catch up to having the best from 2 aspects. It is still an advantage for her, but it's not as significant as I think it used to be, which is kind of crazy to think about. But she is still very, very good. 1 in each stat, but that is almost certainly going to be 2 in each stat at a minimum, because you play an aspect card, everything gets boosted up. Often going to be 3, sometimes going to be 4, potentially 5, but, you know, that's not really realistic in my opinion, and not until maybe the late game where you're winning anyway. But 2 to 3 in each stat every turn, on top of really good general events. And I think something that is underestimated for Spider-Woman, I think her tankiness is kind of, in a subtle way, her greatest strength, in addition to taking cards from 2 aspects. Now, this is very painful to me, because I've, you know, really considered Spider-Woman right up at the top a lot. But there's so many new characters which just have crazy output baked into the identity card, kind of their own special game plan, which just kind of, you know, the Spider-Woman's crazy thing is she can take cards from 2 aspects, but beyond that, her cards are very, very honest in what they do. And Steady and Stalwart punishes her best card. I'm gonna, to my dismay, I'm going to move it down to the top end of very powerful. And I think that's going to go for both player accounts, although, ooh, Iron Man is pretty strong. Let's put her here. I still think she's incredibly good. There's just a ton of incredibly good. Next up, we have Ant-Man, and I really like Ant-Man. I think his thwarting is really interesting to talk about. He has 2 thwarting in tiny form, and when he changes to that form, he removes a threat. You can potentially get 3 threat every other turn, and that's quite strong. But if you ever decide to see him come in with, I don't know, 6 threat, good luck with that, because his 1 thwarting event is pretty terrible and depends on you playing multiple other supports to get it into a good level. And even then, he's only got 1 copy of it. So if you saw it in your mulligan or something, good luck. But generally, he is really, really tanky, really, really high damage. And as soon as you get that helmet in play, which is now a lot easier with cards like Superpower Training, and we've got Manifold in Justice, which is an ally that finds the side scheme, which can, you know, find the helmet. So he's got really much more convenient ways to power up now. Long story short, Ant-Man doesn't hit like the high peaks of like all the crazy mutants and web warriors, for an example, but he's still perfectly strong and very formidable. So Ant-Man, I think in both player counts, to be honest, I'm going to put in the powerful category. And I do believe that, powerful, I do think he is powerful. It's just hard to move him up when, in many ways, he's quite an honest character. And when you start to get into the higher characters, they have, crazy card draw, all sorts of special money generation, or the special gimmick, some special way that they can cheese part of the villain mechanics or all sorts. And Ant-Man is just flipping around, being Ant-Man, and it's pretty awesome. But there is a limit just in comparison to everyone else. Up next, we have Wasp, and Wasp is kind of interesting where I think she's really well-rounded. I think she's pretty reliable for damage, forwarding, survivability. I always feel like whatever I need, she's probably got it, but it's whether she can pay to do that much of it. I think her ceiling is quite low, but her floor is quite high. Her worst games aren't that bad. Her best games aren't going to be that exceptional. It's kind of how I feel. In giant form, she can split up where her damage or forwarding goes. It's very precise, but a lot of her stuff is priced at the cost of an aspect card, and not even a modern day aspect card, I could argue. I think her stuff is all just a little pricey for what it does, with a few really kind of nice exceptions, but not enough to move her up significantly for me. Her Ultra Ego ability is really interesting. It lets you shuffle stuff back into your deck, but it's not helping you out early on, which I think is very important. And that stuff you shuffle back into your deck, you might still not see for a turn or two. You might see immediately. You might get another use of Professor X and so on. But it's far from guaranteed, which I think just holds her back slightly when I've got all these other characters with some really guaranteed strong abilities. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So Wasp for me is going to go into usually powerful, because I think she usually is powerful. She usually does really well for what she can do, but she just doesn't peak high. She doesn't have the capacity, I think, to match a lot of these other characters. And that's going to go for both player counts. Next up, we have Quicksilver, and I didn't really know what to do with his stats. Once he's set up, he is absolutely incredible, can have some absolutely absurd late game turns, but his early game is, he's called Quicksilver, but he's very slow to accelerate, and I think more than slow to accelerate, he's random to accelerate. You have to hope you draw his upgrades in the right order, to get the one that best suits your deck. If you build a aggression deck that's all based on attack, and you just find your defense upgrade, and you don't find the forwarding one, you don't find the damage one, you can have an awkward couple of turns. And player side teams, again, help, but you're starting off with that one forwarding stat. There is some limitation here. It's funny, when I started playing the game, everyone was trying to say he was S tier, and unfortunately, I think once he's set up, he is, very strong late game, but it's just the early game, which I hold to a high degree. Unfortunately, in this tier list, which does favor the early game compared to the late game, does favor consistency opposed to high peaks. It's not going to be a great score for Quicksilver, but he is still really fun, and I do like Quicksilver. Let's just quickly drop him here in 2-player, and I think maybe one up in solo, just because I think 4 shines a lot more when someone's there to help him 4 and manage things a little bit, whereas I do think Quicksilver is a bit more of an all-rounder, at least, even if he needs some setup. But just, yeah, I don't know. It's rough for our speedster. Next up, we have Scarlet Witch with 4 copies of Hexball, one of my favorite events in Marvel Champions. It does damage, it removes threat, it draws cards, it stuns, confuses, it puts toughs out, not all at the same time, and most importantly, you don't know what it's going to do until you play it, because it's random, which is kind of simulating her chaos magic. It's very cool. It's generally a very, very, very good, very efficient card, but you don't know what's going to happen from it. It has enough variables, and she has a couple of ways to tweak it, that it generally will land well in your favor. So I do think, some of the lack of control she has over certain things does hurt her, but what she has is absurdly good. Her survivability is very high, with 3 molecular decays on top of Hexbolt stuff. I do think her damage is surprisingly good as well. Her forwarding is one of the most common results from her Hexbolt, and she has 2 forwarding baked in. So she doesn't necessarily have any glaring weaknesses, and I think she actually has quite a lot of money. Hexbolt draws her cards. She's got her Ultra Ego ability, Spiritual Meditation, Sorcerer Supreme. She's got all the Mystic stuff. Scarlet Witch has so many things going for her. There's just a small element of Hexbolt not finding that thing you needed when you were under pressure, but generally, she isn't under pressure very often. So Scarlet Witch, I know, is 100% going to go on the second tier, but whether she's above or below Captain Marvel is kind of a coin flip as far as I'm concerned. But I like the consistency of Captain Marvel. I'm going to leave her there below Captain Marvel, but she is, anyone could put her above Captain Marvel, and I would totally get it. Next up, we have the Guardians. We have Groot as the first of them. And I think his damage is actually pretty considerable. I think his Root Stomp is kind of an underrated card, but unfortunately he runs on these growth counters, and that kind of gets consumed by damage, which does block damage for you, which is good, but they're worth way more when not spent to block damage. So the hardest villains, which get extra attacks, which get extra ways to damage you outside of attacks more commonly, all these things just hit Groot down. And unfortunately, even against the easier villains, when I compare him to most heroes in the game, he still has a harder time against them just because his cards are pretty expensive and they don't give him a lot of money to play with, and you need to keep these growth counters up, and it's just kind of difficult. But I really like Groot. He can shine in the right place, particularly if the scenario doesn't, punish him too much, particularly if, maybe in multiplayer with Overwatch, things like this. He does have some key places he shines. Really like Force Field Generator for him. But Groot is more lovable than I think he is strong. So in both player counts, I'm just going to quietly drop him into this tier. Nothing to see here, guys, and we'll go back to our tier list. Next up is Rocket Raccoon, and his damage before he has his weapons is pretty horrific, but once he has them, it's really, really good and consistent. Overall, I think this is quite a strength. His forwarding is 2, can go up to 3. His forwarding card that readies him is super efficient, particularly if you have boosted your stats, but even so, it is just good. Survivability, unfortunately, I think is one of the worst in the game, at least to start with. He starts with 9 hit points and 1 defense. He doesn't have a defense card. He does have a card which boosts his health. He does have a card which heals him, but until you find those, and even then, timing can be a bit weird with the healing card. Sometimes it's absolutely incredible and just heals you almost to full health. Other times you don't need it or it doesn't line up right, and it's a bit weird. But I do think Rocket is rich. He has card draw on his alter ego, on his hero side, and he has double resources. The only reason it's not 6 is because his card draw is situational on having minions or having tech that he wants to get rid of. We do have his new zero cost card, Energy Shield, which I mentioned for Iron Man. Rocket can just play it, then get rid of it in alter ego, and he turns 1 card in hand into 2 cards in hand, which I think is pretty helpful for him. But there's just a case of, where's his damage if he hasn't found a weapon or if his weapons are running out. And then you've got to flip down to put battery packs back in and then hope you find them again so you can charge up his good particle cannon, and so on and so forth. He has to line a few things up, which just doesn't make his power as convenient to find as a lot of heroes might be, but he's still very, very good, can be very, very rich. I think boosted a lot sheerly by the money he can get. I think I move him up to powerful, maybe toward the lower end, just because there are so many good heroes. I keep saying that. I think that goes for multiplayer as well. I think he's slightly better in multiplayer, but not enough to significantly move him over other heroes. But there will be more minions he can get more card draw from. If this went up to 3 and 4 player, I think Rocket would keep steadily moving up. Next up, we have Star-Lord. One of the best Rush heroes in the game. Unfortunately, this is not a Rush tier list. And when you take Rush away, as this tier list does, it does definitely hurt where you might place him. Also, when you take away sort of a mass ally spam down a little bit for this tier list, maybe it hurts him a bit as well. And, he takes extra encounter cards to do stuff. Things can go really wrong for him if he gets unlucky with that in particular. So there are some downsides to Star-Lord, but he's rich. His hero ability, that discount is really useful. Generally, it is going to be in your favor, especially if your helmet is out, especially if you're comboing it with his events, which get benefits from encounter cards being out. Generally, he's a combo character, and if you do smart combos at the right time, you're going to get massive payoff. And that even includes just getting his upgrade down that boosts all the forwarding of all his allies. And the fact that he can make all allies Guardian traded has some particularly powerful combos in leadership, and even Energy Sphere and Aggression is really good to put on anyone when they're considered a Guardian as well. So he has a lot of things going for him that I really like, but unfortunately I think this tier list in particular, this format, doesn't reward him for what he wants to do, which is going to hurt the expected placement you might imagine for a character that is generally very, very strong. But I still think he's perfectly good played in any of these ways. I really, really like Star-Lord. He's richer than you would imagine, one of the richest characters in the game. It's just that his richness comes with downsides that you might not conventionally think of him in that way. So under the context of this tier list, and just with the favoring the consistency that I really like, that I think kind of matters most. Most characters in the game, because there's so many good aspect cards these days, they can be as strong enough as they need to beat most villains. It's just a case of not losing from risky strategies sometimes, and that's part of the context here, which means I only put Star-Lord in powerful, but I do think he's powerful. Definitely going to put him probably here for now. We'll see how this tier builds up. I think probably the same in solo. We'll have to see. We don't have a lot of characters in here. Again, a bit like Rocket. I do think maybe he's slightly better in multiplayer in that it's easier to absorb the effects of the extra encounter cards. Next up is Gamora, and I'm really torn about this because I do think her damage and forwarding is just really good out of the gate. She hits the ground running. She's very fast-paced. She can always do a little bit of attack, always a little bit of threat removal, no matter what, basically. But being reliant on events does mean you have to draw the correct event. I do really love cross-counter, but as far as characters go, she is on the squishier side toward damage. I don't think most characters in this game are actually weak to damage, but a lot of characters are strong to damage, and she is not strong toward, surviving damage. Ultimately, for me, Gamora is a character who is kind of stronger in my head, stronger on paper than she tends to be in practice when I play her on the board. I actually played her quite a bit recently. Still very strong, but I just think the average point for strong has moved up so much following all the X-Men expansions, Sinister Motives with Web Wars, everything like that compared to when she was released. So she might not be as high as I feel like maybe she should be, but it's just kind of the case of every kind of space I move her up, somebody else moves down that I don't feel deserves it, which is kind of my problem with everyone in this whole tier list, if you couldn't tell. So for solo play, I think she's going to sneak onto the end of this tier here. Rocket being a genius as well gets a lot of bonuses. Once upon a time, I would have put Gamora way above here, but these days, I just don't think the heavy event focus has, aged as well as some of the strengths of these other characters in terms of the modern card pool and general play that you find in the game and the types of villains we're getting as well. I think she's going to be a tier higher here in solo than she would be in 2-player. I think her ability to damage and still get a trickle of thought coming out from her hero ability and so on is particularly nice just to keep solo games under control. In 2-player, I think I only put her like one little notch down, but that is going to knock her down a tier, I think. So I think this is one of the only characters apart from Iron Man which really falls a complete tier differently in a different player counts. I really want to put her higher, and I should actually say her really good thwarting is really good with player side schemes. Lock and load, really, really good to get her sword out, which again is a strength for solo, but I just don't know if it's enough to keep up with the other characters who, everyone above us here, particularly in solo play, it has perfect thwarting kind of to take out a lot of these side schemes and help them anyway. But especially in multiplayer, someone else can help bring it, and it's difficult to measure. But Gamora, I think, is usually really powerful. It's just so is everybody else. Next up, we have Drax. And Drax has grown on me a lot. Not in terms of fun, although kind of in terms of fun, but I already liked him a lot. It is just a case of consistency and being slow to start. And new cards like Come Get Me Bub combined with Taunt have given him the means to survive damage more consistently than, hoping you draw into Mantis, as well as the means to accelerate getting his vengeance counters. I still think baked in, he does start with one attack as a character all about attack, whose events rely on him having more attack, which is kind of weird. And, you do have to make the villain attack you, and there's a lot of villains where that is particularly unfavorable, where they gain counters or have, some various bad thing that happens, or particularly high attack stat, which you might not be able to kind of soak as easily all the time. So I think Drax has some notable downsides. He is a damage specialist and he wants to just keep attacking. And if he has to deviate from that, it's bad. If he gets an obligation which says go alter ego, that's bad. If he gets stunned without the right cards in the hand, it's bad. He just has a few weaknesses and vulnerabilities that kind of add up in the grand scheme of things. I'd say about a quarter of villains are maybe particularly bad matchups for him. But aside from those, a good Drax game feels overwhelmingly powerful, but a bad Drax game, I'll show you guys on the tier list. A good Drax game, and he feels like he's right up here. He feels incredibly strong. But unfortunately, a bad Drax game, he kind of feels like he's right at the very bottom of things. Very crazy, kind of high-risk, high-reward character. Some scenarios and some kind of places, the risk isn't that big, but other places, it's absolutely ridiculously enormous, which makes him very hard to place. But given my promise at the start of the tier list that high peaks are rewarded, so, lacking consistency does push him down, but his high peaks push him back up. And I think I'm going to put him somewhere roughly around here. You know what? Maybe Black Widow's got so much good stuff as well. Everyone's got so much good stuff. Drax's peaks are so high though, particularly at 2-player when someone can cover for some of his weaknesses. I got to move him up. Maybe in solo play, we put him one space down. Our last Guardian from the Guardian wave, specifically at least, we do have two more just about to come up in a second. We have Venom. It's not Eddie Brock. He's a Guardian. It's really weird. And he's also ultra consistent. This character is so good that when I started playing this game, whenever my friend picked Venom, I lost a bit of interest because of Venom was so good, we just always won. And I think some of this lingering, trauma affected my last tier list where I put him, I think, in 3rd place, which I absolutely actually do not think is the case whatsoever. I think in a day and age where we've got so many cards that consistency in your hero kit doesn't matter so much. because it's a lot easier to build it in from aspect cards, and just so many powerful mutants and web warriors and all sorts. Venom is probably going to have the biggest drop in this tier list compared to my original tier list, but he's still very, very good. His multi-gun is good, his pistols are good, they just let him kind of do whatever he needs. He can get card draw from spider senses. He does have a good resource generation from that and his symbiotic bond, but he's just very jack of all trades. I think Steady and Stalwart has hit him a little bit harder than Captain America. You know, Captain America's Heroic Strike is still good if the stun misses. Venom's Grasping, defense card, not quite convinced, particularly given its resource requirement as well on top of it. So Venom is still extremely good, but anyone who watched my original tier list all that time ago, he is going to be dropping down. So Venom is a character I consider very powerful still. Do I consider him extremely powerful? I'm not sure. Do I consider him more powerful than Spider-Woman? That one for me is really tough. She's so versatile, but he's got, a lot of versatility and reliability and everything he has as well, but he has to stick with one aspect. I'm really struggling with these. I think I'm going to put Venom here for now, possibly subject to change as we fill up this row as I'm going to think about this. I think the same for 2-player. I'm going to drop him roughly about the same place as Spider-Woman for now and see how we go. Okay, I'm back. I had to go sleep. Let's move on to Spectrum, who is a weird character. I've given her 4 in most of her stats here, but it's almost like a placeholder because she changes her forms, which changes her stats. And if you just pick one form and try and stay in it the whole game and focus on that, if I were to focus on damage, I could probably give her a 5 stars in damage, no problem. But I'd have to lower everything else, including card value, because if you're going to play Spectrum and not use her form changing mechanic, which is pretty efficient and good, you're not really playing Spectrum that much. You might as well have just picked any free attack character and maybe played them instead. There's obviously some risk to changing form, and then maybe next turn you don't draw the right card to change to a different form, but often you do, and there are things you can do to mitigate it. If you're playing leadership or generally any aspect, you can use allies to, if you're in the wrong form for what you need, allies can make up the difference because they're so flexible. If you keep going alter ego a lot, when you flip back down, you can choose what form to go in. So 50% of turns, you will have absolutely perfect form control and never be stuck in the wrong form longer than one turn. Although I'd even say that is not a common occurrence, unless of course you use her defense card, because getting stuck in her defense form is definitely the trickiest one. So there is some risk reward to weigh up whether it's worth using that one. It does get better in multiplayer, and as does Spectrum in general, because there's just more targets for her. No matter what form she's in, there'll be something for her to do. Whereas in solo play, if one threat is ticked onto the main scheme, but you have a forwarding stat of 3, and now there's a big minion in front of you, you wish you had a high attack stat, that's more problematic. But in multiplayer, generally there would be a threat for you, and somebody else would be able to help with the minion. But generally, I think she's a really good, well-rounded character with some really interesting stuff. I think she's strong, but I think most characters are to some degree, so it's tough out there. Previously, I used to think she was roughly a top 10 character, but we've had so many new characters and so many ways to make other characters, perform a lot better, be a lot more consistent as well. And I think that all kind of just slightly hurts Spectrum compared to how things used to be. But even her economy is good. She's got 2 good resource generators, but she can use their focus as well, things like that. It's a good character. Let's see where I rank her. It's worth noting as well that Spectrum gets aerial just from turn 1, doesn't even have to play anything. And there's some pretty good aerial stuff as well. I'm thinking just because there's a slight issue of unreliability, which you can account for, but it's nonetheless still present. It's kind of an opportunity cost kind of thing going into different forms. I'm feeling somewhere around here in powerful, perfectly powerful character, just maybe not hitting the consistency that this tier list wants enough for the upper tiers, but I mean, you can still be very, very, consistent with her. So it's tough. Everything is tough. I feel like I said that a lot yesterday. I'm saying it a lot today, and let's move on. Next up, we have Adam Warlock, and Adam can take any card from any aspect, basically, which lets him put all the best cards in the game together, which I think is a huge strength. However, he starts out with like the base amount of cards and resources, and he starts out with kind of like the worst forwarding and attack, unless you include Hulk. Which is to say, he's quite a slow starter, because a lot of his kit, a lot of his best cards, I think, are upgrades. He's got ways to get card draw, resource generation, good stuff, really good healing with Soul World, very, very powerful. But he has to get there and set it all up. I think his cape is a bit of a trap, because that starts solo. You have to invest quite a bit to make the cape good, and he already wants to invest in a lot to get his whole engine going, to get the whole kind of game plan going. He's not a fast character, but he has a lot of potential because he can take all of the best cards from any aspect, but he can only take one of each. So there's kind of a consistency thing here. You don't know what you're going to draw in what order, and there are some ways to make certain things more reliable. He's got quantum magic, which is really powerful to search his discard pile as well. He's got a whole kind of milling kind of thing going on as well with him, which is fun. Ultimately, I think Adam Warlock can be very strong, especially in the middle to late game, but I think his early game is much weaker than people think, and I think a deck building trap, which isn't relevant for this video since I'm going with what I think are stronger decks, but just as a heads up, I think people have a tendency to see, oh, I can put stuff from any aspect in here, let's load him up with all the best upgrades and supports from every aspect, but then every hand of cards he gets is just really, really slow. I see that kind of thing a lot when I watch streams or Marvel CDB, not all the time, but it's something to note that Adam Warlock is kind of what I call a low impact hero in terms of his events that don't do as much as a lot of characters. His stats are a bit low, he doesn't start with a lot right out of the gate, so you maybe want some higher tempo options to cover the game. And let's go ahead and just rank him. He's just got the Mystic trait, which is very relevant. It's very good. I think I rank Adam about the same in solo and two-player. This is a two-player list. It's difficult because, you know, I think he is powerful, but he has to get to the point to be powerful, and I think it takes more than most characters. So if you ask me, is Adam Warlock powerful? I'd say usually he is, but he starts off a little slow, and if you don't get a good start, sometimes he just lags behind in terms of, you know, what I would like. So I definitely think he's good. He can take on most scenarios in the game. I mean, most characters can to some degree, and it's just very difficult. I could move him up. I don't think he's like that far away from Rocket or anyone. I think Spectrum's a little above him, so I'm going to stick with here for now, just so I'm not putting everyone high up, because I know what's coming in the mutant waves. But again, in solo, I think, Iron Man in solo, though. I'm gonna put Adam above him for now, and we'll see how we go with that. Next, we have Nebula, and I love Nebula, and she's got 2 card draw on her alter ego ability, which is, I would say, I don't know, 80 to 90% consistent is what it feels like to me, especially if you use her card that lets you shuffle techniques back in, because she plays a technique which is kind of like a preparation from Black Widow, and she gets card draw. But they go off not when the villain does something, but at the start of the turn if you start in hero form. So typically you are alter ego, you play one, you flip to hero form, start of your next turn, a bunch of stuff happens. But this is kind of where the reliability problem for Nebula comes in, because you can play something that removes threat, but then maybe the main scheme just ticks up by 1 and no side schemes come in, and that threat removal is kind of going to be wasted. But also, a huge minion might come in, and the threat removal might go to a good place, but you really need to deal with this like villainous free attack minion or something. You're just committing to what you're doing ahead of time, which I think is really fun. But obviously, in terms of optimal play, the wrong thing might have been paid for in advance. That doesn't help you exactly as you'd like. This is something slightly clunky and disjointed between playing something in advance and then random stuff happening in the encounter phase and hoping it lines up. But kind of like Spectrum being in the right form, the more people in the game, the more likely what you paid for is going to be particularly effective on the next turn. So in 2-player, she gets a boost. She can also use a lethal in 10 off of her turn. So multiplayer really helps her. That card really helps her get a lot more out of her techniques before they trigger. It's very, very efficient, particularly if you can trigger 2 or 3 techniques from it. Ranking her is going to be painful. It's having to pay for stuff in advance and hoping it's the right stuff to begin with, and then her alter ego ability won't work. And as I did draw one of the technique cards and stuff like that, I think she ends up somewhere down here. Particularly in solo, you know, she has to flip form a lot, and there are a good amount of villains where that's harder to do, and that just has a little effect that nudges her down. Even if a lot of them it is fine to do, particularly if you build Injustice. But I don't know if I could put her above like Wasp or Iron Man or Adam Warlock. I'm gonna put her. I'll put her here for now in solo, and I think in 2-player she can use stuff off turn, but then Miss Marvel stuff that, you know, she can scale up herself with Embiggen and Shrink does scale up well with more people, with more targets. I'm going to put this Nebula there in both lists for now. Next up is War Machine, and as you'd imagine, he has really good damage. He has a lot of damage cards, he has a lot of damage upgrades. Shoulder Cannon in particular stands out. However, he doesn't have a lot else. He's got 2 14 cards, which are okay. They're basically what you'd expect, except they also ask for ammo for some reason. And then he can shove his 14 cards back into his deck with his alter ego ability, but it just feels kind of die. You know, his signature ally is fine as well for it, but it feels very, very lacking for a character that really wants to keep going alter ego. His survivability, I think, is actually really bad until you have his upgraded chassis in play. Before that, he's got 2 defense, 10 hit points, and a dream. It's better than being 1 defense, 9 hit points, but it's kind of like each thing is just 1 notch up with no defense cards, no stuns, anything like that. So it's kind of night and day before and after you get the upgraded chassis in play, which I will say has become a lot easier with the new Shield tech supports, Leo and Gemma in the Agents of Shield box. Generally, I would say War Machine's cards are priced roughly how you'd expect, but they also ask for ammo counters. It kind of feels like the cost is artificially inflated in that way. I kind of feel like because you're managing his ammo counters, playing the ammo counter game, maybe the value of the card should have been boosted a little bit to account for that. But at least things like Float Like a Butterfly and the Cyclops Leadership Ally really help him get a lot more damage from his shoulder cannon in particular, which is, of course, his best upgrade anyway, I think people would have said. So he still has that good damage, but now it can get multiplied quite significantly in the right situation. But he still has to set things up. He still has a slightly clunky kind of game plan. I still really like War Machine. I do think he's really fun, and he can peak really high once shoulder cannon set up. Maybe if you get munitions bunker, and then Float Like a Butterfly or Cyclops, someone's maybe helping provide some of that confuse for you on top of that, and if you're also trying to provide that as well. Takes quite a bit to get him to his most awesome, but when you do, it's really good. I should say as well that I think to some degree player side schemes have helped him quite significantly. Superpower training is something I put in almost all my War Machine decks now, and I think in 2-player, I could really put him anywhere, probably in this tier. I want to put him higher up, but to put him higher up than Quicksilver seems crazy, but I genuinely think with the new Leo and Gemma cards that already help him with his tech, and the player side schemes to help him set up, although again, that does help Quicksilver, it does kind of help Thor with build support. It's tough. I think I'm going to drop him here, just for the 2-player potential, but in solo, I don't quite think he's there. In fact, Hawkeye just feels a lot more flexible and dynamic. Do I put him above or below Hawkeye? I don't put him below Hawkeye, just Hawkeye with his arrows is got a lot more sort of, I feel like, flexibility, whereas War Machine is focused on damage, but he's not a rush character. It's not a rush list anyway. But I don't think that single-minded focus, but a need to set up is kind of going to cut it in a lot of solo games. He can definitely win plenty of times, but he's going to have to work harder than a lot of characters and maybe, in my opinion, be a little bit less consistent at it. Next up, we have Valkyrie. Poor Valkyrie. She's really good once she's got Dragon Fang equipped at taking out minions. A lot of people say, oh, Death Glow should be 0 cost. No, 1 cost is actually incredibly inefficient for a ready after defeating a minion on a character that can easily defeat minions. If you feel like you don't have enough money to pay for it, it's because her other cards, which you're playing from your hand, are the more expensive ones than maybe they should be, or maybe she should have at least some decent kind of economy. She does have a card that gives her card draw after defeating enemies, which is good, but I don't know, everything is very clunky and expensive for what it does, so she's not scoring high in a lot of categories. She has a good kind of thwarting card, but you have to defeat a minion. It does stick around on the board though, so I could almost have given her 2 stars for thwarting, but that base 1 for on top of having to situationally defeat something to trigger the thwarting, just not as flexible as I would like it to be. Her survivability, I don't know, she has 12 hit points, she has a defense kind of upgrade that can boost her defense to 2, 3 if Death Glow is on the villain, and that's when you can start to get value out of her defense card, but putting Death Glow on the villain generally means you are in an emergency situation and are probably on track to lose the game. Putting Death Glow on the villain, just not good for Valkyrie at all. Most of the games I play with Valkyrie, her defense card is just basically effectively blank for me. It's just really bad in terms of anyone who wants to, I would say, win with her, or in multiplayer, not be carried so much by other players. You just need to keep Death Glow free to put on minions. Her Choose of the Slain is good. She does have a lot of potential, again, at defeating a lot of minions, which scales up really well. 3 to 4 player, scales up really well in the very minion-heavy scenarios. But nonetheless, she is quite flawed. And this is all before we consider her obligation, which is extremely annoying, and her nemesis, which I don't know what they were thinking, I gotta say it. I don't think ranking her low is going to be too much of a surprise to people. I think in solo, I'm just going to quietly drop her there, just because of how deadly her nemesis set is and how slow she is to get going, and she's got the least targets of minions there. And then I'm going to say for 2-player, I think it's the same tier, but I think she's better than Hulk just because you start to get more people to help cover weaknesses, and then she can really lean into her minion thing. Maybe she's got a bit more time to set it up. Someone to help with her nemesis set is probably the greatest bit of help she needs and could get, which I think it boosts her up over Hulk. Does it boost her up over anybody else? I mean, in the right game, she can do really well. Let's say I'm playing Mutagen Formula, tons of minions, but I think we're going to put her here still for 2-player. There's just too many weaknesses, too many kind of gaps for me to put her any higher. Up next is Vision, who has surprised me. He's constantly felt better and better every time I've played him, and he's a character that I don't think peaks high. I've given him a quite good card value, for example. I think his cards are good for the price. But to some degree, some of them, notably Solar Beam, and also his card that finds his other cards, I forgot the name of it, but they don't necessarily have high values, but they have high flexibility and versatility, which I think summarizes Vision really, really well. So his thwarting, for example, I think is one of the best in the game with no investment. He comes with 5 thwarting events, and his signature ally can thwart for 6, 3 twice, and then you can get her back again and again, as well as having 2 printed thwart. If you play his signature ally, then all of his thwarting events every deck pass. I don't know if any other character can kind of compete with that thwarting. Obviously, some have higher basic thwart and readying. There are other ways that other characters can get threat removal that doesn't match up to the same kind of way I'm measuring it here. I think Vision, whether it's 1 or 2 player, absolutely annihilates player side schemes very flexibly, which adds a lot of value and power as well. I think Vision is going to score quite highly. At one point, I was rating him above Captain America. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but here's the thing. When I'm talking about consistency on this tier list, I don't think Vision peaks high, but his consistent results are really, really consistent. Oh, I'm overwhelmed by minions. I can just sit in intangible form, and I can soak them for a bit till I find the answers. I don't take damage that way. On the other hand, if I can keep flipping, I can keep getting Vivian back from Hickory Branch Lane, and she is devastatingly good. I'm going to drag Vision up, and I definitely think to my surprise, I just think he's good. I think he has a kind of a slightly rougher start in terms of only having 5 hand size in his alter ego when the game begins because of weird wording. But he can flip down, then go dense form, which gets him a card draw. He can just sit in intangible, which means he doesn't have to worry about his defense that turn 1 as much. So I don't think it's as big of a downside as you'd expect. I'm going to be a little bit crazy here, but I think I'm going to put Vision, actually, yeah, maybe just slightly above Captain America these days, which sounds crazy. I think he's a character who doesn't feel powerful, but just doesn't lose games. And if you're not losing, the only option is to win. Hopefully that makes sense. He's not like a super defensive tank, although he can be quite, with his intangible form, hard to defeat. He just doesn't lose, in my opinion. That's kind of the experience I have with Vision. You know what, for solo play, just because I think Vision needs to go alter ego for a bit more of his power and flexibility in terms of Vivian and stuff, I think it's a little bit harder on some scenarios, and so maybe it's just enough to tip the balance and put him down. But I do think he is really, really good, and an optimized, Vision, leaning to a couple of the best player side schemes for him, I think is extremely, extremely powerful. Give him specialized training who can hit it in 1 solo beam in solo play, and then reboot himself with, boost of stats. And it's just everything I feel like is just good with Vision. I really am quite a Vision believer. Next up, we're on to Sinister Motives with Ghost Spider. And I'm torn about Ghost Spider because she peaks really high, but I think her lows are really low. She has a very disruptible game plan on multiple levels with stuff like stuns, stuff like exhausting her. And yeah, if you've got the Peter Parker ally out, great. But what about stuff that targets allies? And then you've got things like, she needs to have these responses or interrupts in hand to ready and trigger her card draw. But there's a chance you don't have what you need, or they are interrupts or responses that don't kind of target what you want at that time. So she's quite dependent on drawing the right event for what she wants to do in that moment. And I think these things combined lower what is otherwise a very high ceiling where she can ready a lot. She's got web warrior trait. She can do a lot otherwise. So kind of a character of 2 halves, I think. And I think the harder the difficulty gets, the harder the villains get. I think it hurts Ghost Spider quite a lot. And it's really difficult to rank in that regard. I think I have to follow my heart. Not everybody can be super highly ranked. And I think for me, just because she's got so many of these tiny downsides that I think do add up, they're just games which I would lose with her, which I just wouldn't lose with other characters, despite her potentially performing better than a lot of those characters in a lot of other situations. I feel like she has to go somewhere in this tier. And I'm going to drop her just behind Iron Man, I think, which feels bad. But I also just feel like that's accurate for my experiences with many different decks, different aspects, even like the best ones, which is what I'm kind of ranking these on. You don't rank characters by their worst aspect because no one's probably playing them in any way that they would use a tier list for. Ghost Spider just has a couple too many flaws for me. I think in 2-player, I think maybe she's going to go here. Gamora's good though, but Adam's good. What am I going to do with these characters? Yeah, I think she goes roughly in the same place. Next up, we have Spider-Man Miles Morales. And this guy has tons and tons of status cards, really good damage, the web warrior trait, the champion trait. He has a lot of stuff going for him. And this is in a world, unfortunately, where Steady and Stalwart has become increasingly more common, particularly in expert mode, which I'm basing a lot of this on. But he's not bad against Steady and Stalwart. I can't stress that enough. He's worse than he would otherwise be, but he's still good. He's still got flexible stats, good traits, and good cards. They just don't hit the crazy heights that they would otherwise. So it definitely is a factor in maybe not ranking him quite as high as I otherwise would, but he's still going to rank quite high. I think what hits him the most are these steady and stalwart enemies with really high attack stat. He can't use his stuns in that case, of which he has many, and he has 9 hit points. I think that makes him a lot more vulnerable. So there is some consideration there, but generally just a very, very good, well-rounded character that will surprise you with how good he is. You know, his hero abilities are basically just extensions of his events. They could be written on the appropriate events if they had enough text space on them. So you could say he doesn't have a hero ability, but all his events are better than expected. But either way, the average turn, he gets a lot of value. For me, I'm going to move Miles up into this category. It has to be here, 2-player or solo. I think he's very good. The question is, how much does steady or stalwart hold him back? Should I put him above or below Captain Marvel is what I'm thinking. I think I'm going to go for above just because he is so good. Web Warrior is so good. And that does give him a lot of card draw like Captain Marvel. Not quite the same kind of thing, but I feel like I'm happy with this. And I think in solo, I agree. I think I put him here as well. But once you're ranking like this tier, even a tier below it, and it's going to be a problem with the tier above, these characters I think are really, really like close together. And one good game with one character will make them seem a lot better than a bad game with another character next to them, but also vice versa. I think it's different strengths, but a lot of strengths, and it's just however you choose to weigh that up. Next up, we have Nova, who is very, very rich. Turn 1, his Rodrigo ability is going to make you want to spend a wild resource to get a double-use Quinn carrier, or maybe 2 resources for a double-use Quinn carrier. It's a good deal, guys. You want to play his helmet, and it's going to be incredible, because every time you ready up, it's going to keep readying the helmet, so it can be a triple, or even quadruple, quintuple, use Quinn carrier, just getting you so many wild resources. It's incredibly, incredibly good. I think some of his events are just fine. They're not like amazing, but they are pretty decent when, using his helmet to pay for them and so on. But I think what really elevates Nova is 2 things. I think for one thing, he gets aerial basically from turn 1 because of his helmet. But 2, he's got this little card, 2 copies of it, called Unleash Nova Force, which is probably the best comeback mechanic in Marvel Champions, at least the strongest if you've got it. If you zero a scheme or you defeat an enemy, you get to ready and draw a card. And by readying, you get to ready his helmet again. So if the board gets flooded and you have a lot of things against you, and you pop Unleash Nova Force, you get to kind of defeat everything, keep drawing stuff, keep getting money, keep readying up, and just keep defeating stuff in this huge chain of events. And you might have started with 5 cards in hand, but by the end of it, you could have drawn another 3, 4, 5 cards. It depends on the situation. Multiplayer, this gets even better, but it's very, very strong. There are whole strategies where you use this Miss Marvel ally who can return an event to your hand to keep returning Unleash Nova Force to your hand and just making sure you have it every turn. It is very, very good. You can play him without doing that, and he's still very, very good because he is rich, and when you do get that card, it is often still very, very impactful. Nova, I think, is actually a character that doesn't feel powerful, but is powerful. He's almost kind of a death by 1,000 cuts, lots of little things, lots of little readying, lots of little resource generation, that all adds up to a big total. I think in solo, he's got less targets for Unleash Nova Force, and as an event-driven character, he's more dependent on drawing the right thing at the right time, or you might just have one attack and one fort to deal with whatever the villain has done. But I still think he's very, very good. Rich characters can kind of just do a lot. I think in solo, he goes here, and I think in 2-player, he kind of goes in a similar place, but I'm going to put him 1 above, just because as you start to get even just a 2nd player, his targets for Unleash Nova Force just increase exponentially. Next up is Ironheart, a character who starts off extremely weak, but becomes an absolute colossal powerhouse that I can't stress enough, that once you get to version 3, the game kind of just concedes in front of you. You can kind of do everything you need at any moment while building up this massive kind of one-hit KO, or at least huge burst damage kind of thing, with her progress counters, which have no cap. So you can build up like 50 of them and do 100 damage as long as you can control the game, which she starts to become very, 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 very good at. However, the kind of challenge is getting there, and in a world where I'm making a tier list that doesn't reward a mass card draw to just burn through your deck and accelerator, it does hurt her a little bit, but she is nonetheless still very, very good. And I think, unlike Iron Man, for example, she can play her events, go down to hero form, build up, get something done while she's building, which against high tempo scenarios or scenarios with small main schemes in solo, the Ironheart peaks really high, and I've given her low reliability on the score here, but that's kind of before you upgrade or as you're upgrading. You start with only 1 fort, only 2 forting events, gotta hope stuff lines up. you have the situation where you need progress counters, and if you get a couple of bad hands, that might significantly slow down you changing forms, which is quite a big deal for her. Getting stuck with 4 hand size for 1 or 2 extra turns is really awful. Doesn't happen a ton, but it is nonetheless a factor that other characters don't have. But the peak is so incredibly high, and she is generally able to get there. For me, multiplayer gives her extra targets, even as 2-player. I think more targets for more progress counters is good. More things to cover her at the beginning of the game, to cover her low forward at the beginning of the game. I think I'm going to put her... Ooh, let's go for extremely powerful. I feel like this kind of tier needs a bit more love. Nothing yet in the very top tier, but don't worry. It is coming. It is right around the corner. I think in solo play, I think it's a little bit harder for Ironheart because of threat thresholds and less targets to get progress counters from. So I'm going to drop her down to the other side of extremely powerful, but she is still extremely powerful, make no mistake. Next up, we have Spider-Ham. Well, this guy is crazy. His forwarding is unbelievable. He's got 12 hit points, 2 good defensive kind of style upgrade event things. He's got really good recovery, and he's got the Web Warrior trait. His money, his economy is crazy, both because he's a Web Warrior, but because he's also got this whole tune counter mechanic where when he takes damage, he basically gets to bank a resource for the future. And there are a few cards in the game which really help him out with this, as well as strategies like letting a minion attack you, or, quick strike, oh no, it's giving me money. He has some real problems to deal with. He also has a really easy obligation, like ridiculously easy, and all of his cards are just amazing. He does have a couple of weaknesses. I think his attack stats starting out, and the fact that his attack card wants to put a Confuse out, makes it more desirable for the villain. His minion control is pretty weak, especially at the beginning of the game, and also on the first turn of the game, you aren't going to have a bunch of tune counters, you aren't going to have necessarily that many ways to generate them, though he does have a few in his hero kit. You kind of are reliant a little bit on waiting for the villain to punch you in the face to get things really going. So turn 1, turn 2 aren't necessarily super ultra powerful, but they can be very good. But as soon as you're like turn 3 onwards, he is just incredibly rich with incredibly good cards. And I think I can just best summarize Spider-Ham as a character who is very hard to lose with, who is possibly the richest or joint richest character in the game if you deck build correctly for him. And that is almost unstoppable. As you guys might have gathered, I think Spider-Ham is crazy strong. I think he's actually a lot stronger than Doctor Strange because he's just so rich, everything is good, and Web Warrior is very, very strong, particularly these days with Madam Web, with Spider 2099, who's kind of recursion, so I don't know how much I'm factoring that in here, but just everything Web Warrior is very, very good. And in 2-player, he goes straight to the top. In 2-player, people can cover for his low attack starting out and stuff like that, and then he'll just carry the game for them. Next up, we have SPDR. I think it's meant to be pronounced as Spider, but I'm old and grumpy and don't see that. But Penny Parker is a really good character, really cool with her robot suit and everything. Once you build it up with your interfaces, once you have like 4 or 5 interfaces out on the board, you basically just win because you can do everything, often repeatedly, especially with All Systems Go, which is an absurd card. The trick is kind of to get there, and she can have a couple of bad starts. There's kind of maybe like a 10% chance not to get an interface on turn 1. Things can go a little bit weird, and if you get someone like caught off guard as well early on, she's just a little bit susceptible, more than I would like, to things going wrong at the start. But if you can make it to like turn 4 with 3 interfaces out, you basically won the game, is kind of how it feels. So in some regard, she's very, very good. She is just slightly less consistent than I would personally like, although she is quite consistent, and she does peak very high. It's just we have a lot of strong characters, but Web Warrior trait definitely is going to help her. A very fun character, kind of unique build style that is a character who has grown on me. For me, it's a consistency kind of thing. Do I put her like below Venom, or do I put her like above Vision? I think she could really go anywhere here, and I think depending on what you value, you might put her up or down. I'm going to tentatively drop her here in both player counts, I think, although 2-player I think is better for her. I'm going to drop her here in 2-player, and in solo I'm going to actually nudge her just behind Venom, but I could see the argument to move her around a bit. She's very, very good. It's just I think every character above is very, very good enough to get over the finish line in even a lot of like the hardest scenarios without having any kind of consistency or early game issues, except maybe Ironheart, but I think Ironheart peaks even higher than SPDR Penny Parker, which is kind of crazy. These characters peak very high. I don't know what to tell you guys. Everyone is kind of good. And with that, we're on to the mutants. We're starting with Colossus. The X-Men and mutants, I should tell you guys, you're going to be seeing a lot more of those red stars these characters are very, very good. So Colossus is a character who needs the toughs to truly function, and some villains, maybe, I don't know, almost a quarter of them, do have some kind of mechanic or other, or chances that's significant to remove these toughs outside of his control, which is very unfortunate for him. So he's a lot less consistent against those than I would like. But aside from that, he can absolutely dominate his enemies. Once he's got his card draw upgrade out, maybe his resource generator as well, he is just so incredibly rich, and all his cards are so incredibly good that Colossus can feel really, really strong. But he also has really low lows. He's a character of two extremes, high and low. I think that makes him a little bit difficult to rank. Since this tier list favors consistency, I'm trying to look at sort of the grand pool of all villains as well. I think it's going to lower him a bit down from where he would otherwise deserve. I think a lot of the time you play him, he's going to feel stronger. And I actually think he's a character who does feel strong, in contrast to Nova, who doesn't feel strong, but is strong. Colossus is perfectly strong, but he really feels strong. It's really satisfying to play him. Colossus, I think, is a character who's powerful. I actually would say he's maybe almost extremely powerful, but he has these things that can go wrong. And for me, I just think I can kind of clear the kind of difficulties we need to clear with other characters more consistently than him. So I'm going to drop him in powerful, and a lot of the time he'll feel like it maybe should be higher up, but when things go wrong, you're going to feel it significantly. That's kind of my viewpoint here. I think a lot of people will think he's too high, and a lot of people will think he's too low, and this might be one of my most kind of controversial picks here, but I still think he's really good. I don't think there's anything wrong with him. I just know every other character, when you build them well, play them well, they can still take out most of the hard villains in the game, and they don't have as many vulnerabilities. I think in this tier, we're starting to see a few characters that have things that can kind of go wrong, but otherwise peak very high. I'm looking at Spectrum and her forms, I'm looking at Star-Lord and his encounter cards, I'm looking at Colossus and his toughs, and how quickly he can get his card draw upgrade out there, which side schemes have helped with, but it's not like he has a ton of thwarting either. So, you have some considerations to make there, but he is very, very good. Make no mistake about it. Just ditch his precon if you're using his precon as fast as you possibly can. I think Spectrum and Star-Lord and Rocket aren't as good in solo either, so I don't think he's going to move differently compared to them, but just as something to note. Next up is the invincible Shadowcat. She has this little mechanic when she's in her phased form and defends. She doesn't take any damage, and by the way, Quick Shift is basically a zero-cost tough that draws you 2 cards, which is as absurd as it sounds. It's one of the craziest cards, I think. Maybe in the game, I don't think it gets enough appreciation. It's kind of effectively, if you have 5 cards in hand and you spend it, you're down 1 card, 1 resource, but you kind of get 2 resources worth of value just from it blocking damage, but then you get another 2 cards. So it's a 1 card that gets you 4 cards worth of value, which is mind-blowing. So Shadowcat is very, very good, just defensively, between her event and just her ability to basic defend and not take any damage. Her whole kind of gameplay loop is try and end in phase, but then get to solid to spend something on an attack as well to get that bonus resource, which gives that pretty considerable damage. A Shadowcat Surprise is one of my favorite events. It just is nice damage itself, but then it readies you to potentially thwart or attack or divide where you're putting that attack, between the event and then readying and attacking again. So she has a lot going for her. All of her cards are generally quite well costed and quite good. I think what holds her back for me compared to a lot of people is her obligation says don't play for a turn. It says don't attack, don't defend, which is everything she wants to do, and the game is encouraging you to build into. In many ways, this kind of pushes her toward leadership, in my opinion, because then you can at least have allies on the board and play allies to do things while you're not allowed to. I just absolutely one of my most hated obligations in the game, because it basically says don't play the character. She's then got a really above average nemesis set, but she is an above average character, so she can generally deal with it fine, but it is still something to note that she puts these cards in the encounter deck, or can get them from the encounter deck with a nemesis, that are going to be a little worse than average, and I think that just nudges her down. When you're up against one of the hardest scenarios in the game, which is kind of the thing we have to talk about in context to rank Shadowcat, because she is in consideration up there. A lot of the mutants are going to be. If you're under pressure and she draws her nemesis or her obligation, it's going to hurt her a lot worse than the average character. It's also worth mentioning for Shadowcat that she is somewhat dependent on being able to attack, and if you don't draw an attack event, or if she is stunned or so on, it can make it hard to get back to phased, and her game plan can start to break down slightly. So just a few gaps in the game plan. I really, really like Shadowcat. I think she's very, very strong. I made a whole deck with her, just to take down Expert Ronan and after it won like 4 times in a row, it's like, this is good enough. She's a strong character, but I do think everyone here is really, really strong. So that was ranking her for 2-player. I think for solo, she goes in roughly the same place. I just have to make a decision, is she stronger than Ironheart or not there? It's so tough. Strengths are so incredibly different. Your style of play and what kind of villain is probably going to make a big difference into this as well. If you can set up easily on Ironheart, absolutely her. But I do think Shadowcat is maybe a little bit more flexible. I'll put her slightly above. Next up, we have Cyclops. Cyclops is kind of a crazy character. Nobody talks about him like this. I've not heard anyone say it except me. I'm sure people have. But what I want to point out about Cyclops is, aside from all his ally stuff, his laser blasting, his tactics, etc., Cyclops is a character with the most tutoring I have ever seen in Marvel Champion, almost without compare. He is able to, when he starts Ultra Ego, find a tactic upgrade. When he plays his footing event, he's able to find a tactic card. With Phoenix, he's able to get a Cyclops card, and because Phoenix is naturally psionic, and he can take lots of X-Men from different aspects with his Ultra Ego ability, you can take psionics from all these different aspects. It makes Cerebro very easy to play, to just find allies. Everything seems to pull him toward finding the right card at the right time, which adds a level of ultra consistency. But on top of that, he has this Optic Blast ability, which is to spend a resource and deal 3 damage to an enemy with an upgrade attached. He has a lot of upgrades. He's got 3 falling events and his Ultra Ego ability to let him find these tactic upgrades as well. Put one on the enemy, and suddenly he's got 3 damage available. 4 if you basic attack with him, which isn't super desirable. But what I'm trying to say here is that even if you don't draw a single attack event, the chances are you can do at least 4, if not more damage. Just start to manifest it for its Optic Blast and whatever else you have on the board, which makes him super consistent at dealing with minions. His falling is good, his 3 falling events are quite nice, but his main strength is those allies in combination with his tactic upgrades. Allies, X-Men from any aspect, incredibly powerful. He is kind of the ultimate leader character, notably for the X-Men, obviously. And that is some extremely good X-Men. So even if you only take a small handful, taking the best X-Men allies from across all the aspects is phenomenally powerful. This, I think, almost in the way of Spider-Woman, took a hit in terms of there are so many good basic and even a few good leadership X-Men allies now that almost any X-Men character can have a really, really, really strong X-Men ally lineup. I'll extend that to any hero in the game, because even non-X-Men heroes can run good X-Men ally-oriented decks, honestly. But Cyclops definitely still takes it to the next level. But with Cyclops' ability to find any card at the right time, and I think his almost underrated Optic Blast ability, really push him to the next level. He can kind of do whatever he needs, I feel like, and get extra value from it. And in the team setting, stuff like Practice Defense, but specifically Exploit Weakness, which makes everyone deal more damage, are just phenomenally powerful tools that really raise him up. For me, having seen what Cyclops can do, just a level of consistency that goes very, very high, he has to be in the top tier for me. In solo play, and that's before you consider all his kind of multiplayer support options, but then in 2-player, comboing with someone else, boom, we're right up there in the top tier as well. Cyclops is super good and super, super consistent. Next up is Phoenix, and I have a love-hate relationship with Jean. She has some events which I like when she's unleashed, but when she's not unleashed, the first couple, 2, 3, 4 turns of the game, it feels terrible. They feel terrible. They just feel like clunky kind of aspect cards to some degree. A couple of them are fine. But there's a few that really, if I see a hand full of Phoenix cards, I'm generally disappointed, and that's a weird place for a character to be. Then she's got her obligation, which brings in her nemesis, and her, chance to get a nemesis herself, a Shadow of the Past, Pursued by the Past, whatever. And her nemesis is terrifying. It's like 12 health, I think. Is it like, toughness, steady? It is absurd. It's also the semi-permanent nemesis side scheme. In a lot of scenarios, it's fine, and a lot of people say, oh, it's fine, I could deal with it, no problem. But where are you playing Phoenix when that happens? Because when you play her against high-pressure scenarios, we're talking sort of the top kind of ones in the game, I think when you pull something like Dark Phoenix on top of a high-pressure, very difficult situation, it can just tip you over the edge, and I do think that is considerable. But if you're fighting someone on standard mode in the easier half of villains, you're probably going to breeze past it, no problem, because Phoenix does peak pretty high, and she does have a lot of potential. Worth noting, the Psionic cards are really good, and more importantly, really fun, but for this list, powerful, which is really useful. Power of the Mind has helped her out a ton. My favorite Scimitar character as well, so she has a lot on her side. I love that when you unleash, you suddenly have this big attack stat. It's very satisfying. But there are definitely some flaws as well that, when we're talking about consistency, are kind of difficult to factor in. I think in 2-player, I'm going to put her in very powerful. I do think she is very powerful. The literal kind of phrase of very powerful. I do think so. But she has things that can go wrong that don't let me move her up. In solo play, though, I think I put her slightly above SPDR just because SPDR setting up is more vulnerable in solo. Does she go above Venom or Spider-Woman? I don't know. I think I'm going to leave her here, but I do think she is perfectly strong. Speaking of strong, we have Wolverine. He has a healing factor. He heals 2 at the beginning of each player phase. This is made better by his claws, which you can exhaust to play an attack event, but spend health instead of resources. So if I play a 2-cost attack event with his claws, I take 2 damage. I'm going to heal that at the start of my next turn, which is a long way of saying that if you play a 2-cost attack every turn, Wolverine has basically generated you 2 bonus resources every turn, on top of having balanced stats, 14 card, which draws him a ton of cards for some reason. It feels very, very good. The downside is I think some of his attacks, apart from Lunging Strike, are maybe slightly overpriced or feel a bit more aspecty than Hero. You know, somewhere between maybe. So there is a slight kind of factor there. But his claws, his healing, and, you know, his signature ally and his 14 card, there's just a lot of good stuff in Wolverine, which when you combine it with the X-Men and mutant traits, really makes him very, very good. Wolverine is a character that I think I'm going to put somewhere near Phoenix. I don't think he peaks anywhere near as high as Phoenix, but I don't think he has the lows of Phoenix either. I think he's a lot more consistent, and that is kind of roughly how I see things. And I think that goes for both player counts. I just think he is, you know, in 2-player and stuff, when you start to get more minions or, you know, double the chance kind of thing from encounter cards and stuff, he's just so good at taking them down. He'll make a lot of villain progress, but he's also just still going to be able to contribute in other little ways that I think he is very valuable to any team. And then we have Storm. Almost everything you see on the screen here, all these stars are influenced by her weather deck. Storm, starting with the weather deck, is kind of the Swiss Army knife of Marvel Champions' abilities that peaks so high and is so consistent because she just always has these options every turn from the start of the game, and it's a little bit absurd. Example, I start the game in clear skies or something, and I swap to the thunderstorm weather. I get to deal 2 damage because I did that, and now I get +1 to my attack stat. I can attack for free. I've done 5 damage. But also all my allies are getting +1 attack, and so's my buddy playing next to me, and all of his allies are getting it. And long story short, when I switch to Thunderstorm, I give myself a combat training and a boot camp, and I also give that to every other player at the table as well. And that is incredibly strong. If you calculate the cost of playing combat training and boot camp just from hand with your cards, just to make it simple, you'd be 7 cards down, 3 cards to pay for boot camp, 2 cards to pay for combat training, and then the cards themselves gone from your hand as well. She can just do that turn 1 for everyone at the table. So for solo play, that's almost like 7 resources of upgrades. For 2-player, it's like 14. And you could say there's diminishing returns, or this is a hero ability, those are aspect cards. It's not quite the same. And you could rightfully point out that Thunder also powers up the villain, so there's a downside. But even if you say, oh, it's only 10 resources of value, oh, it's only 9 resources of value at 2-player, and obviously it's solo, oh, it's only 5 resources of value, that is absurdly good. I think just having the ability to toggle that on from like the start of the game to just say, hey, everyone kind of has a boot camp and a combat training is a mind-blowing and like kind of has strongest thing. But you can also clear stuns and confuse anytime basically for kind of the whole table. She can use Blizzard to blank troublesome minions, which is a little niche, but can be extremely good. She can also just lower the enemy's damage if you don't have a good solution for things. She can swap to her Thor weather, ping 2, Thor for 1. In solo, that's a player side scheme done. But she can get her Thor up to 2 with her resource generator. So it's a super good kind of upgrade to play that way. Her cape is super good for readying, particularly with her ability to Thunderstorm boost herself. It's all just so good. And yeah, okay, Thunderstorm does boost up the villain's damage. You do have to be kind of careful with your weathers. But if you go Ultra Ego, the attack boost doesn't matter. If you're in multiplayer, maybe somebody has a stun out, somebody has a tough, somebody blocks with an ally, you could do that. There's so many ways around it in a general sense that it's just so much upside. That Storm is just an absolute powerhouse. Not to mention that, Lightning Bolt is basically doing 10 damage, but you can divide 2 of it, so it's even more flexible. Her footing card, you can divide where it goes because of the way it triggers her hurricane weather. Everything can kind of be split up in efficient ways. Everything is just hitting really hard for its cost. Storm is a really good character that I think, because of the nature of a lot of it's coming from her weather forms and it's giving these little boosts here and there, she doesn't always feel super powerful, although I think some people would say, yes, she does. But I don't feel like she feels powerful enough for how powerful she truly is. I think she's somehow underrated. I think Storm is an absolute powerhouse. I don't care if it's solo or 2-player. Storm goes up here. In 3 and 4-player, she probably goes even higher up. I'm not even putting any more thought into this. The only thought I need to put into it, really, is does she go above or below Cyclops and Spider-Ham? I think it's below. Moving on, we have Gambit. Gambit is kind of an all-rounder, but he has some flaws in his game plan, but also some very high kind of peaks in his game plan. He builds up a counter, at least one every turn, which can be changed for damage. I think generally the conversion ratio of counter to damage, if we were to like put it in terms of resources gained, is a little bit lower than some characters' hero abilities. But if you do happen to use it on a card like 1 by 1, it does kind of multiply their value, so it's a little bit weird. His thwarting is kind of alter ego dependent, and for his alter ego ability, you better hope you find the right boost icons. But in solo, if you confuse the villain, his alter ego ability, which lets you look at boost cards basically and pick one and put the other one back on top of the deck, that one you put on top of the deck kind of becomes your encounter card if the villain is confused. He has a ton of control for solo play, except if the villain is steady or stalwart, it takes a huge dip, and if you don't find the right card at the right time, you can't keep that up, and otherwise he just doesn't peak that high, is kind of the downside here. His kit is also kind of split. Half of it wants to be in hero form, half of it wants to be alter ego. It's like conflict in his kit. It makes interesting decisions, it makes different things happen in different forms, but ultimately, I don't think it is as helpful for him as if he had a strategy that was consistent in the one form. So I think that hurts him a little bit, but I still think Gambit is a very strong, capable hero. Oh, did I mention that he's a mutant and X-Men character with a couple of double resources and a really good signature ally which can basically cost 0 resources? So placing Gambit is something I find quite difficult. I think in 2-player, I'm going to drop him in powerful because he is powerful, but his ability to control the encounter deck and different things is a little bit worse there. His ability to have his, Creole Charmer, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, trigger the Confuse in general, it's just a little bit less useful in multiplayer. But he is still perfectly good and powerful. I think Gambit is nice and strong. In 2-player, I think Gambit is going to go to be powerful, somewhere roughly around here. I think he's good, but I just think there's a couple of things holding him back. He doesn't really have any glaring weaknesses, but he doesn't have any glaring strengths either, is my general kind of thing with him. Above average damage and stuff, but not, every character has something above average because it is a superhero game. I guess if everything's above average, that's the new average, but everything feels powerful is kind of the gist that I've been sort of repeating like a broken record this whole video. In solo, though, his ability to hit Creole Charmer more, his ability to control his encounter card more, I think definitely boosts him up. How much is a great question, because the harder the villains get, things start to go a bit less controllable, a bit harder for him to keep up with what I feel like is his lower kind of peak. But it feels about right, somewhere at the end of the very powerful tier. Up next, we have Rogue. I feel like there's a lot of propaganda about Rogue, that Rogue isn't very good. I don't really understand it. Balanced stats. All of her cards are extremely good, in my opinion. The only thing that hurts her is that some of them are a bit expensive, and she doesn't have any innate resource generators, but X-Gene, Depth Focus all work really well for her. Then there are aspect generators like Martial Prowess, which aren't bad for her when you start to factor in that, although yeah, she only has 3 attacks in her kit, you can use Superpower Adaptation to grab them from discard piles, and then you can pay for things that way if you want to lean into that. Of course, putting Touch on a villain is typically the recommended strategy, which can stop you taking cards from other people, but it does enable Bulletproof Bell. But to talk about Solo just here for a minute, she has stuns and confuses, and if you want to use those, you start to make Bulletproof Bell less consistent anyway. For me, if I can leave Touched on the villain and I do have Bulletproof Bells left, I will maybe try to do so, but not to the detriment of every other single thing that my deck could do. I think that's kind of the trap. Yes, it's good, but Rogue without Bulletproof Bell is already really tanky. From above average hit points, her healing with energy transfer, stuns, confuses, which are also helpful. You just also dodge villain activations. So I don't necessarily think that Bulletproof Bell should be the one thing you build your entire game plan around, but it is really nice to try and line up where you can. It's a bit tricky, but Rogue is just good. Status cards, flexible events that do different things depending on where you put Touch. The ability to, kind of like Cyclops, I guess, get what you need at any moment with Superpower Adaptation. It's different, but it's kind of in that vein. She is one of the kind of characters that does have the tutoring, searching ability. And in multiplayer, with the right people at the table, that can pop off in crazy ways. Some characters have like one event that's really, really good, but Rogue with Superpower Adaptation can potentially use it multiple times per deck pass. Characters that just maybe help her get aerial as well as Stalwart by putting Touched on another hero, start to make her own events get double bonuses instead of a single bonus. So Rogue has a lot of potential. In solo play, I think her potential is slightly lower, but still really good. I mean, I just have incredible results with Rogue. As long as you just build in the economy and start to like lean into her own events as the events, having the X-Men mutant traits really good. I'm going to put her here for solo play, but then I think you go to multiplayer, and you factor in that you can have all these amazing kind of abilities to take, things to help her out, I'm going to put her up to very powerful. There are some characters that aren't as good for her superpower adaptation, but there are dozens who are great for it. And even without that, just the flexibility to grab Star when you need it from putting touch on another player and, borrow aspect stuff, I think is a notable upside as well. It also means there's a chance that you stun the enemy and somebody else uses that status card up, and then you can bulletproof Bell. And you can bulletproof Bell to protect other players, which I think is quite a multiplayer advantage as well. So Rogue, I think, is really good. When people say Rogue's not very good, I don't really know what they're talking about. I really want to put Rogue up higher on this list, if I'm honest. Just everybody is good. You know what? There you go. I think she goes there in multiplayer because she's got all those multiplayer advantages. Notably about steady and stall enemies, because I talked a lot about stuns and confuses there, because their events are flexible, you can put touch somewhere else, and you don't have to be held back that much by the steady and stalwart, because you're just getting a different bonus rather than the status cards on her events. So that is a nice little bonus as well, that she kind of has things she can do instead of the status cards against enemies where it's less valuable. Now we're onto the X-Force, and we have Cable. I would say somewhat, in my view, quite infamously, ranked Cable slightly low when he initially came out. I was saying, oh, play side schemes, yeah, they're really good with him, but they're good with anyone. But Cable takes it to a different level. And what's happened is that we got X-23, who came with specialized training and X-Bunker, which I think are really good for Cable. But we also just got an increasing amount of player side schemes, which was obviously going to help Cable. So in that regard, he has grown in both ways. But then with the Age of Apocalypse wave, we got a new Aggression and Justice player side scheme, which let you grab specific events on demand, which means Cable can grab his events, which are boosted by defeating player side schemes anyway, so he's getting kind of extra benefits from defeating them. He can get what he needs at any moment, and it's amazing, and it's really, really, really elevated him. I don't think I would have put him as high as I am now if it wasn't for that new Justice and Aggression event we got in the previous wave, that are just, give him so much control over getting what he wants when he needs it. But, he's got this rifle that does 4 damage, almost every turn once it's set up. He's got these scaling cards, which just hit some huge, huge figures, and he can radiate up a lot. He's tanky. He's got kind of, in terms of consistency, he's got a safety net for the main scheme and for his health in terms of his, force field and temporal loop, or whatever it's called. Cable is very good for every situation. He is extremely good with player side games. He really elevates them, and he is a phenomenal force. One of, I think, the strongest characters in the game. So if you see other content creators saying, oh, Cable's really strong, to you, I would say believe the hype, because I have come to think he really is very, 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 very good. So the question to me is not, is Cable top tier? My question is, how top tier is he? And I think he's in the top half of the toppest of tiers, however you want to, divide that. I'm going to drop him just behind Spider-Ham, I think, in both player counts. In solo, he can defeat player side schemes more easily without assistance, but in multiplayer, they help more people, typically more efficient themselves that way. It's really close to me. I'm going to put him here for now. Absolutely phenomenally strong character. Next up is Domino, who I used to rate more highly than I do now. In some weird way, I think she might be the weakest X-Force character, which is absurd, because she's very, very good, and I think better than the majority of characters in the game. X-Force is kind of a good trait to have. The trait itself, don't think it's ultra helpful, but the characters all just happen to be extremely, extremely good. With her pistols, her damage is insane. She has tons of money with digging deeps and her jackpot and shuffling those back in. I almost gave her 6 stars for economy. Maybe I should have, let me know in the comments. Just so many characters with a lot of money. I find it very difficult to put too many of them too high. All of her cards are good. I think what holds her back slightly is that she really needs a few cards in play to get some kind of engine going, which is really what puts her from kind of average to extremely good, but a late game Domino is devastating. I think comparable to Penny Parker, Ironheart levels of building up. I think she's kind of, in a subtle way, a build-up character, and when the engine is flowing, everything is getting annihilated. Domino, for me, is a character I think wants to go alter ego a lot, and is a little bit slower to start, so maybe she ends up somewhere around here in solo. Still very, very good, by the way. Extremely powerful is not an exaggeration, I feel like. But I think in 2-player, it's a little better, so I might move her up above Shadowcat, roughly in this vicinity here. I don't think she scales up quite as well as Ironheart, who peaks so high that she'll carry the entire game, but Domino's definitely, maybe, it's really close, but she's roughly around there, I think. Next up is Psylocke, who I think people are starting to realize is extraordinarily strong, but I think when she came out, I said I think she might even be somewhere in S tier, but people generally were leaning toward Angel. Angel's a character that I think feels really powerful, where Psylocke is slightly more like Nova in that she is rich and does a lot of smaller things, but adds up to be very, very significant. But Power of the Mind, her psionic thing, her free and attack with piercing from turn 1, or free forwarding, kind of on demand. Sometimes you can do both on the same turn with readying and stuff. It's super crazy, flexible, and convenient, super reliable. It kind of lets her deal with whatever she needs to. She starts with 6 cards in Alter Ego, and then 2 resource generators. She basically starts with 8 resources to play with however she wants, and free attack or free forwarding, whatever she wants. And that is a little bit absurd. And I'm not going to mess around too much. Psylocke, I think, is underrated and one of the strongest characters in the game, even when Steady and Stalwart is involved, because her events can flexibly do other things to some degree. Generally, yes, less value than if you had got the Confused, but not bad value. And when your character is filthy rich, losing a little bit of value when you're still just having tons more resources than the average character and really ultra flexible stats, it's not holding you back that much at all. And I think just in both cases, boom, she's flying up to be in the top of the top tiers. I am a huge fan of her in terms of fun, but also I think she's very powerful. I don't remember the last time I lost a Psylocke game. I want to say maybe I've never lost a Psylocke game, which might sound like crazy exaggeration. It's not like I just play the hardest villains all the time, so it's not, that crazy in its general. But Psylocke is very, 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 very good. Up next is Angel, who has crazy damage, crazy forwarding. He's really tanky. Everything is kind of going in his favor, but for some reason, my results with him just aren't as good as all these kind of numbers and things in theory would suggest. He feels so powerful. He feels really good to play. He feels really satisfying. You'll play this big attack, then you'll get to trigger its Archangel ability, and it'll be tons of damage, and it will feel so good. But I think, on the other hand, he's an event-dependent character, and although some of his events are flexible, and his Archangel ability means he always kind of has damage, you are dependent on drawing the right cards to get the right kind of results. Beyond that, it can be a little tricky, because he's so focused on aerial stuff, you really have a kind of more limited options, and they are good options, they are really good, and I feel like I should be ranking him higher than I'm going to, but what I can tell you is that I played a variety of decks, trying different things in different ways, and I think they are good decks. People tell me they're good decks, but my results with him just don't seem to quite add up to a lot of other characters, so he's still going to be very, very powerful. I'm still going to rank him high, but maybe not as high as he feels to play. I feel like he feels stronger than he actually is. Hopefully that makes sense, but still very strong. I'm not saying he's bad. I just think people maybe expect me to throw him in the S tier, and he's maybe going to be 1 or 2 down from there. So in solo play, I think Angel just straight up slots in somewhere around this place. I'm not entirely sure where. I'm gonna drop him just above. I really do think Shadowcat, when played well, is really good though. So this is really tough. I think I'm gonna slot him in here for solo play, and then for 2-player, I don't think it's a case that he moves particularly, although his flexibility is good there. But I think other characters get more powerful. So I think still above Shadowcat is maybe a good place around there. But Domino gets so much better in multiplayer, I think. So yeah, I feel like this checks out. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I might change it still, but there's just so many good characters, and I feel like Angel is in some ways really consistent and does everything right from the beginning of the game, but in other ways just doesn't. He can fall into difficult situations, it feels like. Next up is X-23, and you'll see a lot of red stars here. X-23 is really, really, really ridiculously good. She comes out of the gate swinging with huge damage, huge forwarding, whatever you need. Very comparable to Captain America, except she peaks a lot higher, and she has the mutant trait, which always helps X-Men trait on her signature ally, which she's all about, which is absurdly strong, and you can really quite easily build into in most aspects. But she can just do some crazy things, and I think the only thing that holds her back a bit is, I put her economy at 3 stars here, and you guys might be thinking, but I can play loads of cards when I play X-23. Her own cards are just super cheap, and you can play, a lot of the cards that way, but she doesn't have a lot of resource generators. She has 1. She doesn't necessarily need a lot of them, but nonetheless, you are kind of locked into her game plan and readying up and things like that, and anything that shuts that down, or if she happens to get a little bit of a bad turn, if she loses Honey Badger, it puts her just from absolutely crazy levels down to a little bit more normal. And just when it's a game of close margins, I think that matters. So I'm not maybe going to put her as high as I want to, but I'm still going to be ranking her very high because X-23 is very, very strong. See, to some degree, I think I should be dropping X-23 up here, but I think I'm actually going to drop her down a tier just for some of those reasons I just said. But is she above Scarlet Witch? Is she above Captain Marvel? Is she above Miles? I mean, I feel like I could roll a dice and put her anywhere here. One of the things I think that factors into this is that she has to take damage to do a lot of the things she wants. And if she has a bad encounter card or encounter phase, if things happen to get her health low, then she takes damage, and it kind of gets a bit dicey for her. And I feel like that is one small downside, And I think the hardest villains in the game are likely to do that more than the others. So I think I'm just going to quietly drop her here, but it's a very strong placement here, and she often will feel like she deserves to be a tier up, and I completely get that. In solo, I think it's kind of a similar case. In solo, I'm gonna nudge her up just because she can do so much out of the gate, very self-sufficient, and I think she can end games, solo games, very, very fast. Next up is Deadpool, and I'll just say straight away, this is one of my least played characters in Marvel Champions. He doesn't quite gel with me. Do I like risk-reward characters like Drax and Star-Lord? Absolutely. Do I like Deadpool with his own kind of risk-reward style? Doesn't click for me. I don't know. Just acceleration icons just don't do it for me. And the way that if you lean into his regenerating degenerate ability, which is what happens, when he would be defeated, he's not defeated. You just get Ultrigo with 1 hit point. It's kind of a pseudo invincibility. If you get the right encounter card, or boost card actually, it just defeats you. So if you lean into his special thing, sometimes you just randomly lose, which in 2-player, which is what I play most commonly, I'd say, it feels really bad if you're like 3 turns in and suddenly you get obliterated, and then your other player is like, do I continue? Do I not? What's happened? All that work just kind of randomly disappeared because of a sort of weird bad luck that on some scenarios is not going to happen, and you are basically invincible. And in other scenarios is somewhat likely to happen. So you can lean away from using his ability, but then all of his potential, I think, takes quite a hit. Still a very good character, but it's kind of weird. In some ways, if the cards line up right, and I'm really in many ways talking about encounter cards, because Deadpool's Ultrigo ability lets him line up cards in quite a convenient, powerful way. If the encounter cards line up for you, you are invincible, and you can defeat stuff that almost any other character would be defeated by. But on the flip side, sometimes you just lose randomly out of nowhere if you decide to use his hero thing, and I think that kind of makes him hard to rank. But his burst damage is insane, his healing is insane, he can just grab cards on demand, which is its own kind of insane. His signature ally is really good. He has a lot of red stars here, but he also has a lot of red flags. I'm genuinely not sure if I should be putting Deadpool at like the top of S tier, or like somewhere in the halfway mark. He'll lose the things, he shouldn't lose to sometimes if you want to use his strength, but generally he can be really difficult scenarios. I think I'm going to go for kind of a compromise, put him not in the top tier, but the second tier down, and just kind of leave him around here. But Deadpool is definitely peaks higher than almost any other hero, is how I feel. And I think that goes for both player counts. I think maybe it's slightly easier in solo play to, absolutely annihilate the villain, but nonetheless in multiplayer, particularly with his card that draws people cards, depending on the acceleration tokens, it can be extremely potent as well. Then we've got the Age of Apocalypse wave, starting with Bishop. Tons of damage, his rifle in particular, tons of survivability. I didn't give him 6 stars here. When his uniform is out, it feels like 6, but that's dependent on one upgrade that you have to find, and if you've taken damage beforehand, it can be too risky. Sometimes you have to heal. There is a small risk factor in that. When you've got his rifle and his uniform out, you're basically invincible, dealing massive amounts of damage. Before that, you are kind of a regular hero who has a lot of money, but might be prone to resource floods, which takes his reliability down. But basically, whatever cards you do have in hand, you're going to be able to afford, and it's going to do absurdly valuable things. But Bishop is just a strong, strong character who peaks extremely high. Now, this is going to be a bit controversial. I feel like a lot of people will feel like Bishop should be tippity top S tier, but with an eye on consistency, and also I kind of have a rough idea of what I'm putting where. I know I want to put another character who I think has particular gains in 2-player up higher, which I think is kind of going to push Bishop down. But really, I think he deserves to be on this top tier as well. I just can't put everyone up there. Because you can start to see we had a bottom-heavy tier list, and then we kind of hit the mutants, particularly the X-Force, and we're starting to get a top-heavy tier list. And, I'm trying to keep that in check. It's a superhero game, so I'm giving myself permission to go a little bit higher up on average, but I don't want it to get too crazy. But in solo play, absolutely going to be able to blast through the villain, and I'm going to put him in the top tier there. Very, very, very strong character, which is something you're going to see on the next character as well. We've got Magik. Magik has this ability to see the top card of her deck and to play it with a discount each phase, which means basically you've got a 6th card in hand as long as you choose to play that card, but you can cycle through her deck in various ways, set things up on top, get that lined up. It's basically 2 extra resources of value in the hero phase, and if you get your defense event or Colossus on top of your deck, maybe with a little bit of help from Limbo, her support which kind of moves cards around, or a defense event that you brought with you from, let's say, Protection, you can get up to 2 effective resources of value during the villain phase as well. So you can get kind of 4 bonus resources before you consider that she's got the X-Men, Mutant, and Mystic traits, which are incredibly powerful. The Spiritual Meditation just synergizes incredibly well with trying to set something up on top of her deck. She is a character I think kind of falls into the Nova category, where she doesn't feel as powerful as she is, because she does a lot of little things. She gets a lot of little benefits. Oh, a discount here, an extra card there. I cycle for my cards this way. I line everything up that way. Everything kind of just goes in her favor. So when she was released, I was like, oh, she didn't feel as strong as I expected. But as I kept playing, I realized she didn't feel as strong as I expected, but she was strong, if not stronger, than I expected. So Magik is just phenomenally good, and sometimes it feels a little bit like cheating. It's just very good, summoning things, moving things around, kind of in the Cyclops kind of vein. Her stepping disc and her alter ego ability, flipping down. She does have a lot of tutoring as well. She can kind of set things up how she wants, and that is an extra power on top of all her extra resources and trait shenanigans as well. So Magik is good. The question is, how good is Magik? And no word of a lie, just in solo play, gonna slap her up here. I think Bishop kind of peaks higher in some way, but I think she's just more consistent. Maybe Psylocke moves down a little bit because of the Stadium Stalwart thing. Magik does have status cards as well, but I don't think, and so does Spider-Ham even, but I don't think they are as built around them, whereas Psylocke is very built around Confuse. Even though she has options around it, I feel a little bit better with this. Going into 2-player though, I think I like what Psylocke can bring to the team still more than Bishop, just because she can control some threat extremely well, and threat does start to scale up, whereas Bishop is still fine at forwarding, but it's not on a Psylocke level. Magik though, I'm going to put up here. Just phenomenally powerful on any team. Always happy to have her around. Oh, and I didn't even mention what seeing the top card of your deck can do for certain allies like Hulk or Cosmo, things like that. Wolfsbane, just so many potential good allies for her. That just leads to card draw or absurdly good effects. It's really, really good, and just sets things up for her. Finds her good stuff really quickly because you're moving through the encounter deck. She's just exceptional. And then we start what I like to call the tale of 2 halves in Age of Apocalypse. Starts out extraordinarily strong, and then we have Iceman, who is a character that has grown on me recently. I'm finding him a bit more fun. I think playing him against less strong scenarios has let me enjoy his... No, less strong is not good English. Playing him against some easier, slightly weaker scenarios has helped me find the fun in him in his Frostbites, where against the harder stuff, I was finding it a little bit frustrating, because he's got a ton of resource generators. He's got cheap card draw, cheap resource generator. He works with X-Gene and Death Focus. Team building exercise, obviously. But all his cards feel like they're a little bit overpriced to begin with. So you're getting all these discounts, but you're just kind of, to begin with, bringing things back into line anyway, is a little bit how it feels to me. But hey, he's very tanky. He's got the X-Men and Mutant traits, which I think does a lot of heavy lifting. So based on his stats here, he should probably be a bit lower than I'm going to rank him. But based on his traits in combination with that, he's going to move up a little bit there. Kind of a slow-paced character who does have a lot of control, particularly in, his Frostbites work against Steady or Stalwart, so does his Frozen Solid card, and that is quite an advantage there. But they're still slightly kind of pricey for what they do. They just get around things that other cards can't, so take that as you will. I think in 2-player, Iceman, just mutants, it's hard to rank a mutant low. I think I'm going to slot him in here next to Gambit above Rocket, and I think in solo play, I think it's a little bit tougher for him, but I still think he's good, and I think things are tougher for Rocket as well in solo play. I think I'll still put him roughly in the same place. He is powerful. He just has a few drawbacks and things that are somewhat harder to line up than other characters without getting the reward that they would get up if they did have something that was that difficult to line up. Next up, we have Jubilee, who she's got a few traps, but if you avoid the traps and navigate around that, I think she can do a ton. I think she's way better in 2-player than solo play, just because both of you can exhaust and get her one of her item upgrades to begin with, or if you have someone who's got an even better item upgrade than you, you guarantee getting it for them on turn 1, kind of like being a mini Cable, and that is really, really good as well. If you lean into damage with her, her aggression kind of event builds can be overwhelmingly good. Same for Justice and Thwarting. But she does have a few traps. I do think her identity card is particularly weak. Shopping Spree, I think, is, in 2-player, I like it a lot. In solo play, It's just very frustrating at how long it can take to get value, unless you're building to have extra ways to take threat off of it, because it's quite specific in how you deal with it. But I generally think if you're doing that, you're losing out on other potential elsewhere to some degree, or you're relying on drawing that thing early on, or you're losing a lot of the benefit you would have got from it. So it can peak higher, and I think she's a character who can actually peak decently high. But the average game, maybe less so. She's still got the mutant and X-Men traits as well. She's got a lot of status cards, so Stadium Stalwart I think does hurt her a lot. But she is, on other scenarios, really doing a lot better there because she gets a lot of value out of them. Ultimately, I think I've just got to rank her, and I think she's going to slot in solo play somewhere around the Rocket to Gamora area. I think maybe... I feel like she's worse than Gamora, especially she's got the X-Men and mutant traits. So I'm gonna move her up. Do I move her above Iceman? I'm a Jubilee believer. She's got extra resources. But what about setting Stalwart? I'll put her slightly below Iceman from a consistency standpoint, maybe for solo. But as soon as we hit 2-player, I'm very happy to put her above Iceman. Question becomes Gambit. I do think her multiplayer potential, if the team is kind of just built with her in mind, is quite high. Call it controversial, but I'm going to put her there. I think she's a character who doesn't always feel strong, but if you can be free to specialize and do what she wants to do, she can do a ton of stuff. In 3 to 4 player, definitely feel confident. Maybe she kind of moves up even more. I feel like she can do quite a lot. Up next, we have Nightcrawler. And Nightcrawler, I'm just going to put this hot take out there. I think he might be the lowest damage character in the game. And I think that's a reason why, I saw someone on Discord recently say, oh, aggression felt really good for him. I like him in aggression a lot as well. I think aggression suits him phenomenally well because his own damage is just really not quite there. Sometimes I wonder how much precon design factors into the hero's design, because Nightcrawler's precon, although it's protection, is all about defeating minions for change of fortune. He's got under control, powerful punch, and I don't know if they remembered to put damage in his own hero kit, even though it came in the aspect itself. So absolutely, yes, you can build damage into him, but it's something that he himself needs to have covered in his deck building because he just don't have it. And that's a weird thing to say, as most heroes have a lot of damage, but he is ultra tanky. Other than that, though, I think his Bamf kind of thing is really weird. It doesn't always line up very well. Often you want more than you have, or you have too many. It really just feels like he needed some kind of upgrade or support to help him manage his Bamfs, and I think that would have made everything else flow a lot better. So unfortunately, Nightcrawler is going to earn himself the place of, I think, the weakest mutant character. Now the question is, how low do I put that down? I just see so many strengths in all of these characters that I definitely don't think you could put any mutant or X-Men character down here just because of the trait support. But then these other characters are really good. I think I might just... I don't know, guys. These characters are all good. I'm gonna put him here, and it's gonna be about as good as it gets, I'm afraid. But I mean, there are arguments to raise him up, but all these characters have powerful strategies, so it's, the problem of this whole tier list in a superhero game where everyone is super. Nightcrawler is just the least super of the mutants. So we started out high with Age of Apocalypse's Magik and Bishop, then we just had 3 low hitters, but in a tale of 2 halves, we've got to have 3 kind of slightly weaker mutants and 3 stronger mutants. Enter Magneto. Now, I haven't quite given him 6 stars for his economy, although I almost did. He has double resources, extra card draw, and he does have the ability to shove some of those resources back in, but it isn't as if he can build up a kind of massive resource generator engine. I don't know. It hasn't hit quite the same as Captain Marvel for me, but it can hit very, very high. And beyond that, you have a very, very well-rounded X-Men mutant character who does often discard a lot of essential stuff accidentally, but does have a lot of their own good stuff to make up for it. I think because of the way he discards stuff, I think there's kind of a slight consistency thing in terms of getting any kind of aspect super powerful game plan going that he can do, but he might discard it. I think he starts in around here. Just going to start to really fill out our tier list kind of nicely. It looks a little bit more kind of the shape I might expect now. So I think we're going to go with that. I don't... I could easily put him, I think, as high as here. And I could easily, I think, put him as low as here. I think that's kind of the bracket we're looking at for Magneto. So again, I'm talking myself more into putting him at the top of extremely powerful, and I think that goes for both player counts. I do think... Oh, Ironheart is so good, though. I do think that in multiplayer, he gets better because he has things that, his forwarding card really wants attachments to be out for maximum value. His attack cards kind of want minions to be around. He wants to be able to wrap them in metal and things that just become more common at 2-player. But Ironheart is so good when you can just have a little bit of coverage for her. I'm gonna put her. Yeah, I'm going to put Magneto still at the top of extremely powerful. I think he's really, really good. That brings us on to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the latest wave. I'm really excited to talk about that. And yeah, not many heroes left to go. This probably has been an extremely long video, probably my longest ever, but I wanted to get into some proper detail since, so many characters and, I might not be making another tier list, so we might as well get into the weeds here. Maria Hill is a character who, thanks to the Pericles, is absurdly kind of invincible. It's just the early game which really holds her back, but the value she gets from generating and moving counters is hard to compare to. But aside from the Iliad and late game or points bulletin, I think her damage can be a little bit weaker. Obviously the Bellerophon helps with that, but it's a lot of setup and you have to choose what to set up. For me, that's going to be the Pericles and the Iliad. Definitely in solo. Cersei starts to become a bigger factor as soon as you hit 2-player and up. Getting these allies in for basically free is crazy. Maria just has a crazy engine, and late game Maria Hill, it's hard to compare to. The scenario just can't do anything as you start to pummel it into oblivion with perfect control, no risk. Your engine is just, it's just turn the dials and win the game. But the early game weakness, I think, is a genuine thing. You can even get bad opening hands, and my deck building is largely now, make sure you give her the best turn 1 and 2 as possible, because every other turn afterwards is going to start to fall into place, and by the time you hit turn 4 and 5, you should be starting to dominate the game absolutely. But I think the early game weakness against the hardest villains in the game just holds her back from being, otherwise, like a lot of people saying, oh, she's strongest character in the game, as strong as Doctor Strange, or, at least super S tier. Well, I think she's actually better than Doctor Strange in many situations. I think in solo, the early game weakness does hold her back. I think Doctor Strange is better early on, and that is going to hold her back. But if anyone can give her just a bit of coverage in multiplayer, she will then go on to carry the game for them. So what that means is that in 2-player, she goes right to the top tier for me. But I don't know if just, there are just a slight consistency thing, which is weird for a character who can exhaust and get what she wants at turn 1, kind of guaranteed. Compared to the early game of all these other characters, or, with Spider-Ham, for example, he can peak really high as well. So I think I feel good about putting her at the end there. Now, she's a newer character, so in the future, maybe I would have decided to move her up. Let me know what you guys think, but I definitely think she is very, 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 very strong. In solo, I think that takes a bit of a hit, but how much of a hit is hard to say exactly. It depends on the scenario. I think if you play standard play, especially against the easier half of villains, but generally a lot of villains, even on an expert though, she's going to feel like she just cannot lose. But I think against pressure, I think against things that, maybe target some of her weaknesses, I'm going to drop her down below Doctor Strange, but above Miles, kind of in the status card crowd here. Extraordinarily powerful character in Maria Hill, extraordinarily powerful support character. Didn't even mention Doctor Strange as a support character, but he supports himself so well. Kind of like Cyclops and Storm and Cable. Support characters in this game tend to support themselves to overwhelming victories. This leaves us with Nick Fury, who I initially predicted was going to be in the lower half of the tier list, but they held back all his best cards, and I hadn't got to actually play a practical game with Practice Plan at that point. And let me tell you, his car is insanely good. His intelligence analysis is insanely good. Practice planning that back is incredibly good. And his signature ally, Maria Hill, actually, I forgot to mention Maria's signature ally, Nick, but that's part of her counter generation. Insanely good. Nick's signature version of Maria just explodes his threat generation because he actually wants to put threat on his suit to use as a resource. He's kind of weird like that. He steals threat from the scenario as well. The signature ally is really good. And all of these things, particularly, when you factor in Practice Plan for intelligence analysis, things that will benefit him multiple turns per deck pass, that gives him a lot of consistency, a lot higher peaks as well than I expected, which make Nick Fury very, very good. And intelligence analysis and his threat prevention preparation as well, his eye patch camera. These cards are kind of safety nets, which in combination with Practice Plan give him so many safety nets that although, yes, in solo, he can, struggle with the threat going over because he makes the enemy scheme. Not as much as I think you'd expect if you play around these upgrades, these preparations. And even then, when you get to multiplayer, he's just kind of got a free reign in a lot of cases, if built well in the proper team, to do what he wants. That I think he does really, really well. So in solo play, I find him a little bit difficult to rank just because based on the scenario, the threat threshold is going to make a big difference. But to me, I still think he's very good. I might drop him kind of here in very powerful. It depends on the scenario as well. He can cancel a lot of stuff, which gives him a lot of control, and arguably makes me want to move him up. And I'm gonna put him here. But in 2-player, I think he's much more free to do his crazy Nick Fury game plan. and I think that gets a lot of value. And he can even be quite good at hitting multiple minions with Spray Fire, which just becomes more likely when two of you are getting encounter cards, so that somebody ends up getting a bunch of stuff. I still think he sticks to this tier, but I also think he gets a lot better as well, and I might move him, could be crazy, I'll move him right to the top of very powerful, really knocking on the door of extremely powerful. I think he's very, very good. Next up, we've got the new characters that everybody wants to hear about. Where do I put Black Panther Shuri? And the thing is, I think between Vibranium Suit, which I was lucky enough to get to reveal, and Queen Ramonda, her alter ego support, also known as Aunt May version 2, the amount of healing you can get from these is absurdly high that she feels practically invincible. As soon as you get the Elephant's Trunk in play as well, her economy explodes beyond all reason. But until you get that, it doesn't as much, and it does require you to exhaust other cards to get the full card draw. So I didn't quite give her 6 stars for economy, but I thought about it. I could be persuaded in the future. Let me know what you guys think, or do you think I should even move it down? She has those double Vibranium resources that Azure Adana, her upgrade, can shuffle back in. And she, of course, can exhaust an alter ego to just go ahead and find a tech or Black Panther upgrade and reduce its cost, which is kind of economy in some way, I guess. But a lot of what she'll want to use that for is to set up her response on her hero side to get a good Black Panther upgrade there. But it is extremely, 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 extremely good. All her cards feel like they do really good things. The fact that Vibranium Suit and her Panther Claws are just such kind of good value to trigger kind of at any point, very generally applicable, that upgrades the value of all her events and things, which trigger those, her signature upgrades, which triggers her Black Panther upgrades. And because you can exhaust just on turn 1, get any of those upgrades you want, and then, I can play her Fording event and get it to trigger her damage upgrade. She's just reliable, able to do a lot of what she wants at most turns. The only thing I will say is I don't think her early game is super strong because she wants to set things up. She wants to exhaust to get something in play. And I can then play Ready to Rumble, but I'm just kind of, counteracting the exhausting in the first place. It's not going to be, I exclusively decimate everything that's on the board at turn 1. But she is very, very good, and I think she's going to place highly. Now, when I started making this tier list in this video, I did roughly know where I was going to put most characters, not exactly. But for Shuri, I feel a lot less certain. I think she is at very minimum here, but I think she could be here, and I think she could even be here. And looking at it from a 2-player perspective, where someone can maybe cover just for that slight start, I said on Nelson's stream, by turn 3, I had 13 cards on the board, which did happen to have an Elephant's Trunk turn 1. But nonetheless, that kind of potential is very good. That's not always going to happen, but she is always going to have a good game. For me, I think she's somewhere above Vision and below Miles is kind of the impression I'm getting, which means I could put her at the end here. But I think I'm going to settle for above Magneto, which feels crazy because he's got all the mutant stuff. And she only has the Wakanda trait and Genius trait. Genius trait is really good. All the Dora Milaje stuff, just really, really good. Milaje stuff. Pronunciation's hard. And then in solo play, I think it hurts her a little bit, but I still think she's exceptionally good. So I'm going to put her below. You know what? I believe in Shuri. I'm gonna put her at the top of extremely powerful. I think she's really very good. After that, we have Silk, the final character I'm going to be ranking on this tier list. And you know what? Her economy is really good when you draw cards in Alter Ego, but you can't do that turn 1. And it does consume your precious resource, which you can use for readying with her upgrades, things like that. The Tuck economy is a major factor on how well she does. And in a deck that doesn't focus on mass card draw in, say, Justice with like one ways or another, or in Leadership with recurring webwire allies, I definitely think her strengths take a bit of a hit based on the limits of this tier list, which is slightly unfortunate, but I still think she's very, very good. Webwire is strong, getting card draw is strong, and when her events line up, they are very strong. It's just going to depend a lot on the scenario as to how well they line up. She's also quite difficult to pilot, which isn't going to influence her placement on this list, but if you feel like Silk is just not working for you, she is definitely a lot harder to play than most characters, and can have a few weirdly bad matchups just based on the villain's cards. The encounter deck being fragmented into lots of different mod sets as opposed to being dominated by a majority of villain cards. Some scenarios are just a lot better for her than others. But in general, she has a lot of strengths of Peter Parker Spider-Man. She has money, she's rich, and she can put together some really good damage when she wants to. And as an added bonus, she can take the worst encounter cards kind of hostage. She can kind of tuck them under her, and that is situationally very powerful as well. For my money, though, I tuck a card and I want to spend it and get some stuff going because she has a weirdly kind of a slow kind of hero kit. She has like 7 or so upgrades and supports, which means she has a lot of stuff you want to play down on the board. And a lot of those things aren't actually consistent at what they do anyway. So reliability, I just feel like is quite a way down, but potential with being a web warrior and some of her shenanigans is quite high. So a bit of a weird one to rank. For me in solo, just with the tuck economy being at its lowest, the lowest amount of encounter cards and things to defeat to tuck cards, because she wants to defeat things through tuck cards. I don't think I can put her as extremely powerful as I considered, because Web Wire and Genius, she's got a lot of stuff going for her. So maybe I'm thinking like on this tier somewhere, and I see a lot of characters that I think are more consistent and also do really well, but they also don't have 2 card draw alter ego and Web Warrior traits for the most part, which is, although I guess Penny Parker kind of does have exactly that, which is kind of funny. I just think Silk's potential, if played really well, is quite high. I'm just going to sneak her up here, which makes me feel bad for everyone I pushed down, but I feel like Silk kind of deserves it. And 2-player, I mean, she can tuck a lot more stuff. But so many characters are really consistent and really do really well when scaled up to 2-player. I'm thinking, just for consistency reasons, just below Iron Man, but I do think her peak kind of flies up to the tier above, if I'm honest, in some way. But I think I feel pretty good about putting her there, just below Nick and Iron Man. But I could be persuaded. I mean, Web Warrior is really good. She's somewhere in this vicinity, but again, Shuri and Silk as the absolute newest characters. If I was to make this tier list again in a couple of months' time, they're probably the characters who are most likely to move the most. Let me know what you think in the comments. And I think we have kind of our finished tier lists here. So this is a 2-player list. Let me see if I want to make any adjustments. Nope, you know what, guys? I'm really happy with these placements. And, really, I want to move a lot of characters up, but then would have a super top-heavy tier list, and it already is, thanks to the mutants, kind of top-heavy here. Though I think I've got a fairly good balance. There is at least a curve. But yeah, I'm really happy with this for 2-player. And I'm really happy with this for solo. Something I don't think I've ever said, but since I made my first tier list and then the next day I played Spider-Man and Nova, and I was like, I need to move both these characters up, I've been keeping an eye every time I play Marvel Champions on how powerful these characters feel. So we're playing and I'd ask my partner, who do you feel strongest at the table? I ask myself that. I'm thinking about it. We swap the characters around. We swap different heroes. We try all these different things. And it's something I've been keeping in my mind and tweaking and tinkering with for a long time. But as you can see here in this video, I'm still changing people a little bit, not exactly sure on all the placements, just because there are so many factors. But I put a ton of work into this, technically been, contributing to this with all my gameplay and really thinking on it. Every single game I played for over a year. Eagle-eyed listeners on the podcast with Nelson, when we talked about leadership, I dropped a quick comment that I hadn't really played much with Recursion in over a year, or to make this tier list, which isn't really including Recursion, as I said at the beginning. Little things like that. So it's taken a ton of work to get there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully it's a helpful list. And again, as I said at the beginning, I don't want you guys to think that characters that are ranked low aren't worth playing, because there is a lot of fun to find in, I'd say all of them. Some have more fun than others, but definitely there is a lot of value in all of them. And again, characters at the top, I don't want you to think they're too powerful. Oh, I'm not going to play that. Some of these characters are where they are because they have a unique game plan that is really fun, can only be found on that character. But obviously, if it's only found on them, maybe it's a bit harder to balance for the designers. I'm just going to throw that out there. Maybe in a few cases, they overshot where they should land. But yeah, they are really powerful, but still perfectly fun to play. And I think you should play them as long as you enjoy them. I still play them, particularly Storm, Magik, Bishop, Cyclops, Cable, Psylocke. I mean, maybe all my favorites just ended up in the top. Not entirely the case, but definitely they have such fun game plans. And I do think Spider-Ham is fun. Underrated character, doesn't deserve the hate. All these characters with their unique kind of styles and things they do just have ended up peaking really high. Let me know what the biggest changes you would make are in your own tier list below. You can list your whole tier list, but if I have to read 20, 30 people doing that, I might not get around to taking them in as much detail as I would like to, just because of time constraints. But I really appreciate you watching this far. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you watched my endgame video not that long ago, this is one of those big free videos I was talking about. This is the first one, and I'm even more excited about the next two, which I think are kind of game spanning, but more creative, more interesting, less talked about, and I'm really excited for those in the coming weeks. So I'm Villain Theory, this has been my tier list, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to leave the finished tier list up on the screen one by one with the conditions lined up, just so you can see kind of how I was ranking them. And something I just want to get in one of these videos as a tribute to the person who inspired me to make my YouTube channel in the first place is I hope you guys have fun at the tables. See ya, guys.